Cox with you.
Day of Destiny, the brutal campaign over. Now, America decides the election that will change history. Will Kamala Harris be the first female commander-in-chief, or will Donald Trump return to the White House?
Red alert, bomb threats and a shock arrest in the Capitol. Americans fearing violence as the world holds its breath.
Rallying call, a last-minute pitch to voters as Donald Trump sounds the alarm on cheating.
And the battle for the Oval Office, the count underway right now. Our first projections for 3 states just in. Every result first. Who will be the next president? Special coverage live as America decides.
Well, good morning. Really good to have your company. Welcome to the 7 Network's coverage of the US election. I'm Michael Usher.
And I'm Angela Cox. As we go to air right now, history is unfolding. Votes are still being cast across the country to decide who'll move into the White House. It's democracy in action. But will the hours ahead reflect the best America has to offer the world, or will we see a wave of chaos and confusion? As we come on air, polls have closed in 10 states. Crucially, Georgia and North Carolina. If Kamala Harris wins those, it'll give us a pretty good indication of how this race could go. Hugh Whitfield will have the numbers for us in just a moment.
We also have live counting from the world's leading news network, CNN. Their panel of experts are crunching the numbers right now and making the first projections on every state, every key battleground. You've come to us at a great time because it's all happening right now. They will have exclusive exit poll results to get ahead of the count, and you'll see it all unfold here on the news ticker at the bottom of the screen there, and with our coverage that Hugh's going to be bringing us as well on his map. We're going to be broadcasting every minute, every wild moment live for you at home across the screens of 7. Now, this is either going to be the comeback of a generation for Donald Trump, a man shot, heckled, voted in and out of the White House once before, or this will be a glass ceiling shattering moment as the first female president of the United States is elected in Kamala Harris.
Live from Washington, D.C., I'm Natalie Barr. As the news breaks here in the nation's capital, I will bring you every critical moment. And we'll connect you with our team of expert reporters stationed right across this country. Our US Bureau Chief David Boywood is in Harris HQ in Washington, D.C. tonight. Correspondent Tim Lester is based at Trump HQ at the Palm Beach County Convention Centre. And Miley Hogan joins us from the swing state of Pennsylvania, live in Philadelphia. Michael and Ange, hold on tight. This is going to be a roller coaster of a ride tonight.
You're right about that there, Nat. Stay warm on your rooftop there in DC with the Capitol behind you. We're getting crossing back and forth with Nat as the day goes on. Now, let's get to it. The numbers we'll all be watching today, it's 270. It's a race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris to get to that critical number of electoral college votes.
Now, to explain more, foreign editor Hugh Whitfield is driving our data screen with access to information from our broadcast partners, CNN. Now, Hugh, 50 states. You already have projections for 3 of those states.
Yeah, that's right, Michael Ange. Good morning to you. 4 states that we are projecting, 3 of them for Donald Trump, 1 for Kamala Harris. Just in the last couple of minutes, the polls closed in West Virginia, and we are already projecting that 4 electoral college votes in West Virginia will land with Donald Trump. Now, that's without even counting any of the votes. It is based on the voting history of West Virginia and the polls that had Donald Trump winning that state by 27%. So we are safely saying West Virginia, 4 electoral votes, Donald Trump. Already this morning we have called Indiana and Kentucky for the Republican candidate as well. And just the 1 state so far for Kamala Harris, up here in the deep blue of the northeast of the United States. There are a whole heap of states up here, heavily populated. We are listing them down the side of the map here. Vermont, 3 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. Again, we haven't actually counted any votes in Vermont, but we are very, very confident in projecting Vermont for Kamala Harris, guys.
Yeah, let's go to the grey states there, have a look at those. I mean, these are the ones that we'll be watching as the day goes on. You'll see this map evolve. It will change colour. It will flash. This is live data from the United States, so it's going to stay pretty active.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got 7 states that are in light grey. This blue wall that Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump back in 2016, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then the Sun Belt swing states, so North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona and Nevada. And we already have polls closed in Georgia and North Carolina. We are going to get some very big data from Georgia in the next hour or so.
So just explain why Georgia and North Carolina are so important. Both candidates have been spending a lot of time in North Carolina, particularly Trump, like they may be a bit concerned about there. But what are we going to be able to read into the tea leaves about when we see those results from Georgia and North Carolina?
Yeah, that's right. Georgia is a fascinating state. It is a state with a very large black population, but it's a state that Barack Obama could never win in his two runs for the White House. The demographics, though, are changing, and Biden, of course, won it by barely 12,000 votes 4 years ago. So it is undoubtedly a swing state. We're going to get some big numbers from there very soon. North Carolina, the demographics have changed a lot in the last 4 years. It would be considered a Republican state for a very long time, but during COVID, a lot of people moved out of places like New York and Philadelphia to get out of those big cities and move to mid-ranking cities like Raleigh in North Carolina, and it has changed the voting population. So the Democrats would think that North Carolina is one that they can play for, but I got to say, in the last couple of days, the polls are looking towards Trump in North Carolina by about 1%, but it is one that we will be keeping a very close eye on.
And if Georgia goes at an early stage to Harris, and we're thinking we're going to see about 70% of those votes in the next, sort of within this hour, so we will know quickly. Can we read too much into that? Is that an indication that she could have it in the bag if she gets Georgia?
Well, look, yeah, I mean, Georgia is a big state. 16 electoral college votes. They are very valuable votes to win. Look, that blue wall is what Kamala Harris really wants to restore for the Democrats. If she wins Georgia, it means that she could lose Michigan and make up for it in Georgia, or lose Wisconsin and make up for it in Georgia. But it's Pennsylvania that they're both after, because 19 electoral college votes will help a huge amount.
That's the one we're going to be hearing a lot about, Hugh. There's no doubt about it. And of course, the factor in all of this, Hugh, thank you, we'll come back and forth. The factor in all of this is there's almost 80 million mail-in votes. It shifts everything for this election, how they swing, and we'll go through this as the afternoon goes on and explain which states start counting, which don't, however many delays there are, because each state is completely different.
And it's interesting, this election, because last election, Trump told everyone not to do mail-in votes, so more chance of it being rigged. So, and it really hurt him. So when we looked at those big mail-in numbers, it was skewing Democrats. This time, not so the case.
All right. Well, if you've made yourself a cup of tea and a few sandwiches, stick with us. We're going to go through all of this as the hours go on. Natalie Barr has the prime seat for us live for us in Washington, D.C. Nat, let's go to you now.
Yes, welcome back to the NBC rooftop. The Vice President has made a last-minute plea to voters. US Bureau Chief David Woiwod is with Harris Camp at Howard University in Washington, D.C. What was her message, David?
Nat, good evening. Well, look, the message could not be clearer from Democrats right now, given that there is still a number of hours to vote in a number of states across the country, and that is get out there, get the family out, get your neighbours out, get your dog walker out. In fact, there has been a concerted effort in the past few moments. In fact, we've seen from the Harris camp, their online profile is now actively targeting people in those swing states, really urging them, those wobbly undecided voters, as it were, to get out there and hit those ballot boxes. In fact, we know it is election day, and we have seen a concerted ground effort from the Vice President's camp today. There has been more than 100,000 doors knocked on in that crucial battleground state of Pennsylvania. We have been hearing from those Democrats who they have been hitting the phones all afternoon. But this was the Vice President a short time ago.
Have you voted already?
Give me a second.
You did, thank you. Thank you so very much. You know, it's so important that everybody participates.
Well, it has not been smooth sailing. There's been a number of security scares.
Yeah, that's right. Now, there has been a number of security scares throughout the country. In fact, we've seen one not that far away from here in the US Capitol, Washington, D.C., a very short time ago at one of those civic centres. In fact, a man who had been smelling like fuel, he had on him a flare and a torch. He was taken into custody by police, and they have now neutralised that situation, although we've also seen a number of bomb threats too, particularly in Georgia today. They have been discredited. In fact, there's been one in the past few hours, and that has had the effect of actually driving potential voters away in the city of Atlanta. We know it is a deep blue city, and Democrats are going to need all the help that they can get within Atlanta. We're now being told that those polling stations will be held open a little longer as well tonight, so those people can get to those polling stations.
Yeah, OK. Thank you very much, David Woodward there. We'll cross back to you soon. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has cast his ballot. US correspondent Tim Lester is right there at Trump HQ. He's in Palm Beach, Florida. Is the former president feeling confident, Tim?
Well, we don't know. In fact, he's only a couple of 100 metres from us. That's where Mar-a-Lago is, just across the water over there. You can barely see the lights, but it's pretty close. And we're in a kind of, if you like, a nest of Trump supporters who are sitting by the roadway where his convoy will need to come to take the former and potentially future president along to the convention centre nearby in Palm Beach, where if he's going to speak tonight, he will go to speak, and he would hope, of course, to accept victory. But we're getting word via security people in the area that perhaps what might happen tonight if the vote remains close is that he won't appear at all, that they're going to wait until they believe he'll wait until there is a pretty firm indication in the polling tonight before he heads to the convention centre to make any statement. He's already spoken to supporters via social media.
Republicans, we're doing really well. Stay online, don't get offline, and vote. Make sure you get through and vote. We're going to have a big victory tonight.
So the great question here, does Donald Trump make a move to make an announcement tonight? And if so, will he be accepting victory or disputing it? Nat?
Yeah, considering he's still disputing the loss of 4 years ago. Thank you very much. Let's go to US correspondent Miley Hogan in Philadelphia, in that crucial battleground state of Pennsylvania that we've been talking so much about this week. Miley, claims of cheating are already threatening to derail the vote.
Nat, good morning. Donald Trump has already made allegations of cheating, zeroing in on this pivotal battleground state. He's put a message out on his social media, on his Truth Social, and I'll read it to you. He has said, a lot of talk about massive cheating in Philadelphia, law enforcement coming. Local law enforcement say that they are not aware of any issues with voting that would require law enforcement, and the District Attorney of Philadelphia has also put out his own message saying that the only talk about massive cheating has come from one candidate, Donald J. Trump. There is no factual basis to this wild allegation. Now, earlier today, Donald Trump was talking about the election results, and he did appear to say that he would accept the results as they were. Take a listen to what he said.
If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think so far, I think it's been fair. I think there's been a lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up. Thousands of lawyers are involved in.
Voting in this state is due to close in around 20 minutes or so, 8 o'clock local time. We're at one of the parties where all the volunteers and members of the community who support Donald Trump will be to watch those results come in live, and we'll be here with them, Nat. OK, we'll cross back to you guys soon. We'll cross back to all our correspondents right through the night. Let's go to White House insider Pete Seat joining me now for Expert Insight. OK, what are you hearing? Because we get exit polls, of course. They're the polls that a lot of people don't know what exit polls are, but it's really people being asked as they walk out of the polls, who did you vote for? Do we get any of those right now?
Yeah, so CNN and other networks released the first batch of data at about 5 o'clock this evening here in Washington, D.C. And what was interesting and maybe not that surprising is supporters of Kamala Harris, democracy was the top issue for them. 56% said that was their top issue. 51% said it was the economy if they were supporting Donald Trump. But the most recent number that just came out that is shocking, 54% to 43% Trump to Kamala Harris among independents in Georgia. Now, that might not seem like a huge gap, 54 to 43, but that's a 20-point swing from where Joe Biden was to where Donald Trump is now.
Wow.
From 2020 to 2024.
Okay, so massive swing to Trump in Georgia.
And we'll see what that means. Exit polls don't always mean the end result. Sometimes they can be skewed, but that could be a sign of good things to come for Trump in Georgia.
That's interesting because people could be lying and saying, oh, this is who I voted for, but that would be unusual that they'd be saying I voted for Trump, wouldn't they?
They could be fibbing, but it also could just be the representative sample. It could be the polling sites that they're at might not be, the best ones to attend.
Okay, so there could be a certain electorate that might be a Trump,
Yeah, I mean, this could show, it could be a massive win for him in Georgia. It could be a small win for him in Georgia. This is the most exciting parlor game for political prognosticators, is looking at exit polls and trying to figure out what they mean.
Okay, this is history unfolding, and that's an interesting one, isn't it, Michael and Ange? It's going to be a roller coaster ride, I think, all night. Back to you in Election HQ.
You're right about that. There's no doubt about it. Let's just go straight to our guest on the panel here, Keith Suter, his 5th election so far in having a look at all of this. You heard what Pete Seat just said then about this exit poll. We're in the weeds of exit polls at the moment, Keith. We're talking about a 54 to 33. This is of independent voters in Georgia, but a state that matters. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's one of the key states that either candidate has to win. We know the results in most of the other states already before they come in, but these 7 key battleground states are where we assume the battle is going to be fought, although, of course, we've had that bizarre result in Iowa, which tilted it towards a Democrat victory, and the person who carried out that poll is very highly regarded in the trade. So you have to take that in for granted. The other thing to bear in mind just with that map is, of course, what's called the red mirage and the blue swing. And so the red mirage is that the votes are coming in from small local areas and they tend to vote Republican. Nothing about Trump. This is what's gone on for decades. They tend to vote for local candidates who are Republican, and so you get a sea of red.
A lot of rural voters as well.
A lot of rural voters. Yeah. And then as the night wears on, then it comes from the big cities and they tend to be more Democrat. 4 years ago, before the election, Trump's campaign manager, Steve Bannon, predicted that Trump would declare victory on those early results. That's why people are asking whether he's going to be making a statement early in the evening or early at night or later on, because later on we assume the blue wave will have kicked in and therefore we'll see far more of the Democrat voters coming in.
Sorry, Angela, go. Yeah.
I was just going to say another thing that I picked up from these early exit polls from CNN, which I thought was interesting. 72% of voters say they aren't satisfied with the government. More than that, 43% described it as dissatisfied. 29% say they were downright angry with the direction of the government. That doesn't seem to bode well for Kamala.
No, it doesn't. And the irony is it is not borne out by the figures. The American economy at the moment is the envy of the world. So we've got a booming economy. We've got a lot of money going into alternative energy and all the rest of it. But Trump has done a brilliant job in convincing voters that the economy is in a mess. Now, there are a lot of people who are struggling with the cost of living, but then we all are struggling with the cost of living. But Biden's 4 years in office for economics have been really good. But the problem is he's going to lose on the culture war. All this diversity stuff and political correctness and culture wars.
Exactly.
All right, Keith, thank you. You're going to stay with us. We like your analysis all day long, so appreciate it. Have a look at all the details on the screen for us. This is the information coming in at the bottom there, live feed from CNN and all of the data. A countdown as well to the states that are closing evening, and it is, if I look correctly here, about 11 minutes to on the east coast, but about 11 minutes also now until quite a handful, about 18 states closing. So we're going to get a real read on some data. We'll be bringing all that information in live for you as well. And you're live with 7. Next, just a very simple breakdown of America's pretty complicated election system.
Plus, we take the pulse of voters in Pennsylvania, that all-important state, a key swing state where booths are about to close at midday daylight saving time. This is a live look at the voting still underway. The next polls close very, very soon. We are back in a moment with the latest results. Welcome back to 7 special coverage of the US election race. Here's a list of the polls that have just closed. About to close, at the top of the hour in about 7 minutes. We've got Alabama, Connecticut, Delaware. Those ones aren't particularly swing states, but if you look down Michigan, that's a very important state for both Trump and Kamala.
They're the ones we're watching. They're all coming in, a big bulk amount of states and counting to get underway there. Of course, in the mix of all of that, Pennsylvania, as Hugh mentioned earlier, that's a state that could really decide the race. We're watching it closely. It has 19 of those electoral votes. The polling booths, as I mentioned, just moments away from closing.
Hugh Whitfield and Keith Suter are joining us to discuss more about Pennsylvania. We'll start with you, Keith. The Latino vote could be very important for Pennsylvania, particularly with the Puerto Rican community. Those comments at the Madison Square Garden, the garbage joke, that lit a firestorm.
Absolutely. So this was a so-called comedian who was appearing with Trump. So he wasn't recycling Trump material, but he was on that platform and made a racial comment about Puerto Rico. And that really offended
more than a racial comment. He said that the floating island of garbage in the ocean was Puerto Rico.
That's right.
It was outrageous.
It is absolutely outrageous, and that would certainly have cost the votes. Unfortunately, some of those Puerto Ricans would have already voted beforehand. And the other big problem with Pennsylvania is that possibly Harris made a mistake in not appointing the Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro, as her running mate. You know, she went for Tim Walz, whereas in fact this is obviously a key state, and he's also a good performer. So she might have made a fundamental error right at the beginning of her campaign by not selecting the Pennsylvania governor.
All right, Keith, let's go to Hugh briefly on the wall live data coming in on your map there.
Yeah, Michael, 18 states closing in just 4 minutes' time. That's 188 electoral college votes on offer. I think we'll end up with 6 of those states going for Trump, 9 going to Harris, and those 2 key swing states that we will be watching, Pennsylvania and also Michigan as well.
All right, Hugh, thank you very much. There's a lot about to begin on all of this. It's really getting underway. Those 18 states about to start closing.
2 very important states that we need to hear the results of. Stay with us for our very special coverage. We'll have live expert insight with Hayley Channer from the United States Studies Centre.
Plus, as we mentioned, coming up to midnight daylight saving time, the polls are closing in those 18 states. A live shot there where Kamala Harris is this evening, and our correspondent David Woywood is there as well.
Of course, we have Hugh Whitfield, who will be back with that all-important screen of the map showing us where we start getting those initial signs out of Pennsylvania, out of Michigan. So important. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us live from our US election headquarters as we welcome our viewers in Adelaide and Perth. I'm Angela Cox.
Hello everyone, I'm Michael Usher. It's gone midday daylight saving time. The polls have just closed in 18 pretty big states, including the 2 battlegrounds of Pennsylvania and Michigan. They're all important.
This is our live tally count with accurate data straight from the US. As soon as results from those swing states trickle in, Hugh Whitfield will bring them to us. Let's go live now to Natalie Barr.
Yes, I'm live in the US Capitol. Thanks, guys, with every breaking detail from the heart of America's democracy. I want to go straight to some news on North Carolina. Now, up here on the NBC rooftop a short while ago, I was talking to Joe Hockey, the Australian ambassador, the former Australian ambassador to the US. He talked about the Trump camp being quite worried about North Carolina, of course, one of those 7 battleground states that we've been talking about all week. He said if there is an early lead for Kamala Harris in that swing state in North Carolina, the Trump camp will be worried. So take a look at that. Now, I've just noticed on the nightly, a story's just dropped that Harris has taken an early lead in North Carolina. Only 2% of the vote has been counted, but that does sound interesting. I'll just bring in our White House insider, former White House insider Pete Seat. What do you think of that? Does that gel with what you would think the Trump camp would be worried about in North Carolina?
Yeah, well, let's remember Barack Obama won North Carolina in 2008, his first candidacy for his first time for running for president. Now, he only won by 14,000 votes. Right. That was 0.32% of the vote. And Joe Biden won by 74,000, or sorry, this most recent election. So Kamala Harris has been trying to replicate the Barack Obama coalition. He was actually in Charlotte, North Carolina just a week ago, trying to encourage voters to come out and support Kamala Harris as if it was passing of a baton from Obama to Kamala.
Okay, so a staunch Republican seat, except for Obama, and then Biden almost won it. That's really interesting. We'll keep an eye on North Carolina. In the meantime, let's go to Hugh at the data wall, back in the studio.
Hello, Nat. We've had some big projections come in as those polls closed in 18 states, and you can see a lot of red on this map. A lot of these states aren't worth a huge amount of electoral college votes, but they will push Donald Trump up to 62 right now. States like Oklahoma, Missouri, Tennessee, Alabama and Florida, where it was pretty tight there for a while. Kamala Harris performing pretty well in the suburbs around Miami, but Donald Trump will take his home state of Florida and those valuable 30 electoral college votes. Now, Kamala Harris doing very well in the northeast of the United States here on the edges of New York, states like Vermont, where we're calling those 3 electoral college votes to go for the Democratic candidate. Massachusetts, 11 electoral college votes for Kamala Harris. Maryland and DC as well. Washington, DC, where they have always voted for a Democratic president. So some big numbers coming in already as those polls have closed. And of course, we are keeping an eye on Georgia. Now, at the moment, in Georgia, we've got about 61% of the vote having been counted. Donald Trump is on about 57, 58% of the vote. Kamala Harris on about 39% of the vote. But those booths that have come in from Georgia are mainly rural and regional, what we would call rural and regional booths. And when we look at some of the counties around suburban Atlanta and suburban Savannah, so the capital of Georgia and Savannah down here on the coast, they are almost 3-1 for Kamala Harris. So if Harris can pick up thousands, tens of thousands more votes in Atlanta and Savannah, then Georgia would be looking pretty good for her. But at the numbers at the moment are looking towards Trump.
Yeah, and Hugh, as Keith Suter mentioned earlier on, though, too, there is such a thing as this mirage early vote too, where it looked pretty red for a while, and then it shifts. There were some counties last election round that looked like it was a clear win for someone in the first few hours. Then by the end of the day, it had flipped around entirely. So it's a bit of a ride still.
Yeah, that's right. And they've completely changed the way that they are doing things now in Georgia. 4 million people voted early. They started counting those votes last week. About 900,000 to 1 million people voting on election day in Georgia. Those results are going to come through really quickly. It's going to come down to, the last few percentage points of voting counted before we get a real clear picture where either side is prepared to claim Georgia. I mean, Donald Trump will probably claim it as quick as he can. Kamala Harris with a very close eye on those booths around Georgia and Savannah.
All right, Hugh, thank you. Let's head over to Marley Hogan now, who's in one of those key states, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia there, where she is. Marley, early on, we saw some reports of glitching at the machines. That's going to play in Donald Trump's favour. And we've already heard him reference the lawyers and calling in law enforcement. What's that?
Yeah, well, Donald Trump has already made allegations of cheating, zeroing in on this battleground state, in particular Philadelphia. He's put a message out on his social media pages on Truth Social, and I'll read it to you. He said, "A lot of talk about massive cheating in Philadelphia, law enforcement coming." Now, local law enforcement say that they're not aware of any voter fraud claims that would require police enforcement, and the local DA, the Philadelphia DA, has said the only talk of about massive cheating has come from one candidate, Donald J. Trump. There is no factual basis whatsoever to this wild allegation. Now, earlier in the day, Donald Trump did speak from Florida, and he was asked if he would accept the results if he was to lose this election, and this is what he had to say.
If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think so far I think it's been fair. I think there's been a lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up. Thousands of lawyers are involved in it.
Just want to give you a bit of an idea where we are. We're in the suburbs outside of Philadelphia. This room is full of people who have been working for Donald Trump's campaign on the ground, knocking on doors, also just his supporters. There were big cheers in here before when Donald Trump took Florida. And I just want to introduce you to Larry. He's one of Donald Trump's supporters. He's been contributing to the campaign. Larry, I just wanted to ask you, what is it about Donald Trump that attracts you to him?
So I've been a fan of Donald Trump since I was 13 years old. I actually started watching, saw him on the news one time when he actually funded that skating rink in New York. I don't know, you're probably too young to know the story, but that's okay. That was the beginning of like, wow, this guy's brilliant. He's a really nice guy. And I'm a real estate professional. I own a bunch of real estate. And just knowing that he was a real estate professional, it was fantastic. And I followed him for many, many years. And then when he decided to run for president, I was like, wow, this is going to be awesome. And sure enough, it was awesome. Until 2020, when a lot of shenanigans happened.
So we were talking before, will you accept this election result if Donald Trump does not win?
Well, I have no choice but to accept him. Whatever. I wake up tomorrow and I'm still me, and my family is still my family, my work is still my work, my life is still my life. So of course I'll accept it. I don't accept the 2020 election results, but so what? That didn't change anything, and it won't change anything today.
Do you have faith in the system here?
I don't. I actually don't. I've said several times I'm just not going to vote anymore, but of course I'm drawn to vote anyway. Because I just don't believe it's legit anymore. I went to vote today, and you got this piece of paper, and you fill in these dots, and you put it into a reader. How do I know that reader actually read what I wrote on that piece of paper? I don't know.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you, Larry. You can hear their followers in this room echoing the sentiment that Donald Trump has been escalating, guys.
OK, Miley Hogan in Pennsylvania, thank you. Let's go now to our US Bureau Chief, David Woywood, who is with the Harris camp. David, obviously we've seen all the polls. It's been a polar coaster, as they say. But at the end of the day, it's about who they can get to come out and actually vote, who chooses to vote rather than chooses to sit on the couch, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's about stitching together those coalitions of support within those marginal states. So whether it's or not it's the 400,000 Puerto Ricans in Georgia, or if it's the Muslim vote in Michigan, it's about getting those coalitions together. And we know that back in 2008, Barack Obama was very, very successful at that process. Women, Latinos, black voters. So that has been a real focus of the Harris campaign in the 107 days that it's actually been running, to try and target all of those coalitions, in fact, that Barack Obama had managed to cobble together. So whether or not she's been successful, we know that the former President Donald Trump has made some inroads in those areas. That is according to the polling. He has made some inroads with Latino voters. He did some damage too, but also with young men and black voters. So it is really about getting all of those groups together. And I can tell you, here it is all about that large black community that is really being celebrated. Of course, this is Kamala Harris's old university, Howard University, and a historically black institution. She studied here back in the 80s. And the crowd here, it is a largely black crowd, and they are really celebrating the diversity of their candidate. But of course, very interesting to see, we haven't heard Kamala Harris talk too much about her personal identity, being a black woman in this race, and the history that would then make. But certainly her surrogates and her campaign have been leaning into that in the final days of this campaign to help stitch together all those small groups across the country.
One of the interesting things that you mentioned, which I find fascinating, is that Trump has been able to pick up more of these young black male voters. It's not what we expected. Is this part of that whole Trump bro movement, where he's been trying to engage these young men in America to actually go out and vote?
Well, certainly that's what the campaign has been saying. Yeah, they have been targeting the bro culture, if you will. They have been targeting all of those podcasts, young men, particularly young men without college degrees. But when it comes to that young black men coalition too, they've really been selling that message. Of course, Donald Trump is a convicted felon. He is a man who has now fallen foul of the law here in the United States. And in some ways, and we've heard many black commentators, in fact, talking about this, saying that a lot of black men in this country feel victimised by the legal system, and they see someone in Donald Trump that is sharing that experience. So whether or not that is a reason, certainly it's been put forward as one. But yeah, he's been making significant inroads. It'll just be interesting to see how significant those inroads actually are, and if it will be enough to push him over the line in those crucial states, particularly places like Georgia and like North Carolina.
Yeah, it's a fascinating theory. Okay, thanks so much, David. We'll be back to you shortly.
The big question, though, is whether they've gone to register to vote, though.
Exactly.
And actually motivated to go and actually cast their vote, even though they're saying they're behind you, but are they?
Exactly.
Hugh Whitfield, there's been a fair bit of movement on the wall so far. Let's have a look at what's changing there.
Hello, Michael. We're getting some figures in from two key swing states. The first one is Michigan up here on the Great Lakes, worth 15 electoral college votes. Now, we've got 2% of the vote in from there, 76% for Harris, 22% to Trump. Almost 3-1, 2% of the vote. It's probably one or two booths that have come in, but it does give a bit of a taste of what might be to come. The other one is Pennsylvania. Now, 77%, again, very early vote, very early count, but 77% Harris, 21% Trump. Again, likely just a few of those booths. The fascinating thing about the count in Pennsylvania is that a lot of the votes that have been cast in that state are mail-in ballots, and we are seeing the results from those mail-in ballots early. They are likely to favour the Democratic candidate, so it may look like Kamala Harris will surge ahead in Pennsylvania, but Donald Trump and his team will be keeping an eye for the on-the-day votes that may favour or bring him closer to catch up to Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania.
It looks like Missouri and Mississippi are about to close as well, two more. And in the next 45 minutes, Hugh, there's quite a few states coming in, aren't there? At least, gosh, I can count sort of 12 or so states about to start closing as well.
So about 12:30 daylight time, we'll get Arkansas close. I mean, I could call Arkansas for Donald Trump right now, I think. But then we've got a big list coming up at 1 o'clock, and one of those key swing states is Arizona, that will close in about 45 minutes' time, and Wisconsin as well here on the Great Lakes. So it's going to be an interesting day. I know that there's a lot of red on the map at the moment, but these states, smaller populations, worth less. They have pushed Donald Trump up to 90 electoral college votes, but all the population in the US is up here in the northeast and over on the west coast with California. That home state for Kamala Harris worth 54 electoral college votes.
The other one I'm just really curious about is Iowa. And I know that this is not a swing state, but that outlier of a poll that said Harris was up like 5 points or something insane. It will be interesting to see how that goes.
It's going to close at 1 o'clock. So it's one of those states in the next 45 minutes that will close. The data out of Iowa is going to be fascinating. Was that one poll an outlier? Was it completely off? Or is it in line with what's happening with some of these rural areas outside of Wisconsin? Also Minnesota, which is Tim Walz's state, the Democratic vice presidential candidate. We would expect that Minnesota will go for the Democrats. Will that flow down into Iowa as well, with Des Moines, the big city there?
And the fascinating factor all day long, which all of our experts are going to talk about, Hugh, is that what the map can't show are the 80 million mail-in votes, and that is such a huge factor in this election. So we'll be trying to get a read. Some of those states will start counting them and have started counting them, and Hugh will get an idea of when they come in as well.
But all different rules for different states about when they can start counting. OK, let's get a feeling from Washington insiders. Let's go live now to Washington, D.C. and former US Ambassador to Australia, Jeffrey Bleish. Jeffrey, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, how are you feeling looking at these early figures that are coming through?
Hi, Angela. Hi, Michael. I think at this point it's too early to tell, so I don't have a strong feeling one way or another. I think we're seeing some positive signs out of the Indiana suburbs that may be relevant for the Blue Wall states, but we're also seeing some mixed messages from Georgia and North Carolina about the Rust Belt, Sun Belt area. So I think it's too early to tell, and we're going to have quite a night ahead of us.
Yeah, Jeffrey, you've just been at a Democratic dinner there, I understand. You've helped during the Harris campaign. The mood in the room, how would you describe it?
The mood is positive. It's optimistic. I think a lot of the folks who were here spent the day canvassing. So they were out in Philadelphia and they were in other areas near D.C. And they were seeing a lot of undecided voters breaking towards Kamala Harris. And we've seen some of those trends. The question is that in such a close race, will it be enough of them to make the margin of difference? So that's what we're waiting to find out.
A phrase that I've heard a lot lately is nauseously optimistic. Is that more what you guys are feeling there in the Harris camp?
Yeah, in fact, I've heard that a lot, and it's part of the internet age that that things go viral and become a cliche in a matter of an hour. So that's
Jeffrey,
where we are.
I wonder if there's an element of apprehension, though, too. We've already heard some of Donald Trump's language this morning. Yeah, I'll accept that if it's a fair vote, if it's a fair campaign. There's a lot of conditional talk here, and in the same sentence he's talking about the armies of lawyers that are standing by with all of the, the scrutineering and the conveners process. Your thoughts about what's ahead here? Are you concerned?
Sorry about that.
You've been called back to dinner, I think, eh? Dessert is happening. You've got to get back into that dinner. Why don't you go and do that? We'll cross back to you a little later on. We'll get that question answered, though.
Call me back.
Yeah, good on you, Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It might be a question for Keith Suter on the desk here, too, if we're having a brief chat and bring Keith back in. I think we all do find Donald Trump's language earlier interesting, that it's conditional.
Yes.
We know that the lawyer's going to get called in on this one anyway, and particularly if he comes out early in this evening or in the evening there.
Were lost. But this time round, and that campaign against the result was put together really just before Christmas, whereas now they've had 4 years in which to make preparations, recruit the lawyers, come up with all the arguments, and perhaps even end up with a case having to go to the House of Representatives for a one state, one vote. Not that mechanism is in the Constitution, but it's never been used before.
And as well as those comments, the fact that he has said, there's voter fraud happening in Pennsylvania or Philly, and the officials there is most certainly not.
Exactly.
He's the only person saying that and really smacked it down quite hard, but it's like he's sowing the seeds already.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Keith.
Coming up on this 7 News special, America Decides. The race to 270 is well underway. More polls are about to close, and you can see the map there. Hugh's going to have the latest next.
Plus, they're eating the dogs. We're in Springfield, Ohio, with a fact check on Donald Trump's wild claims on immigration.
Our live coverage continues right after this break.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets of the people that live there.
And I'm walking with my dog, and I'm just hoping they don't think I'm Haitian and I'm walking my dinner. But the bottom line is it was unnecessary, it caused a lot of adverse reactions.
It was a nonsense. It didn't make any, there's no reason for it. There's no reason for it.
Total fabrication.
It is.
I wish we were able to handle our politics a little better, where we fact check people, and then immediately when you know there's a lie, that you point it out.
Yeah, it was one of the bizarre twists of this long campaign, an extraordinary allegation that immigrants in that town of Springfield, Ohio, were eating people's pets.
The city faced hoax bomb threats that saw hospitals locked down and schools and government buildings evacuated. Leaders say the claims weren't even credible.
Well, I guess the big question now that we're in the count is see if it's left an impression on the voters there. Hugh Whitfield, have a look at it for us.
Well, look, we're going to take a look at 2 of the key swing states to see if that rhetoric that we've heard from Donald Trump and his supporters over the last couple of weeks have had any impact. Georgia and Pennsylvania. Now, mail-in ballots are a huge deal in both of these states. 80% of voters, we think, in Georgia have delivered mail-in ballots. Now, they started counting these last week. So that's why we are already getting a huge amount of the vote already in. 45% of the vote in Georgia counted, 55% for Trump, 43% for Harris. Now, that is a big change from about half an hour ago when we were talking about 61% for Trump and 39% for Harris. So Harris is gaining on Trump and Trump is losing ground as that count in Georgia progresses. As for Pennsylvania, very early days. They only started counting the mail-in votes there at 7 a.m. on election day. And at the moment in Pennsylvania, 8% of the vote counted, 72% for Harris, 27% for Trump. I would expect those numbers to come much closer to 50-50 each at some point over the next couple of hours.
So what do we got there? Let's do a time check on the east coast of the United States now, around about 8:24 in the evening, Hugh. What are the next big states to come in and close?
Yeah, so coming up to 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Saving Time here in Australia. That's, what are we up to, 9 o'clock in New York. We're going to have a whole sweep of states close across the country at 1 o'clock. But coming up at 12:30, just the one state, Arkansas. I reckon 20 minutes it'll take for that to turn red. Not very long at all. Arkansas, 6 electoral college votes. Let's put it in Donald Trump's column already.
All right, we like that. Let's get your cameraman just to turn around to the big board, the panel to his left right now, and have a look at what we're looking at in the studio here, because this is fascinating. These are all the states, the changes right now coming in. You can see at the top there, as Hugh's referencing, which states are closing. Arkansas in 4 minutes and 25 seconds. Live data coming into us from the US. It's the first time we've had this in our special coverage, and it goes right into the wall. All right, we're going to take a short break. We're back with our special coverage. America decides.
Arkansas is the next state to close their polling booths at 12:30 daylight saving time.
The latest projections, they're coming up next. And we're back to Washington, D.C., where Natalie Barr is standing by live.
You're live with 7's special coverage of the US election. Welcome to our viewers in Queensland who have just joined us.
Have a listen to this, though. And a quick pause. It was Oh Happy Day, which is being performed at Howard University there, where Kamala Harris is expected to appear later on. Our correspondent David Woywood's there. They're putting on that wonderful gospel tune.
Yeah. And obviously the university she attended, so very exciting moment for all the students there as well as herself.
Indeed.
OK, we're going to check in with Hugh now and what the latest figures. I think you have some on Arkansas?
Yes, hello. Look, we've got South Carolina that's just come in, 9 electoral college votes in South Carolina. That is Nikki Haley's home state, of course, the former governor there. She served as Donald Trump's ambassador to the UN and then challenged him in the Republican primaries. There were some questions as to whether those centrist Republicans, traditional Republicans, would not turn out to vote, instead staying at home or maybe even voting for Kamala Harris. So 9 electoral college votes going for Donald Trump out of South Carolina. We've already called a whole sweep of states across the Midwest of the United States and the South as well. Alabama, Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Missouri and Oklahoma for the Republican candidate. And Kamala Harris with Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, DC at this stage. So 27 for Harris, 99 for Trump. I think we're going to get some numbers very soon and some projections on Illinois, and I reckon we'll be calling Arkansas very soon for Donald Trump.
Hugh, now that we've welcomed everyone right across Australia, and we thank all our viewers for tuning in today, and stay with us, we'll be with you all afternoon as this goes on into America's evening. Just describe to the world, for our viewers who haven't seen it yet, Hugh, the grey states, the ones we're watching, the swing states that matter?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got 7 swing states where the polls leading into Election Day were just too close to call. And there we go. There's Arkansas. It's just gone.
It's very exciting.
We've just projected it, and 105 for Donald Trump now, 27 for Kamala Harris. But these are the states they're after, because these are all expected. Nothing has really happened on the map yet that is unexpected. It's going as per projected at this stage. But 7 swing states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona and Nevada, where it is all to play for. Now, Georgia is the state where we're going to get a call, I would expect, at some stage in the next couple of hours, because they are racing through the count in Georgia with a huge amount, millions and millions of mail-in ballots that have already been counted. They're being put into the computers in Georgia. The Secretary of State there, who will be overseeing it, will be surely able to give some news fairly soon. North Carolina is probably, out of these swing states, the one that Trump could feel most confident about. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, complete toss-up.
Hugh, for people who are just joining us and looking at that map right now, they're seeing a lot of red and not a lot of blue. If they're Harris supporters, should they be panicked?
Look, I think up here in the northeast of the United States, there is a lot of electoral college votes to be found, particularly in places like New Jersey and also New York, 28 electoral college votes. Over in California, the polls are still open there for another couple of hours, 54 electoral college votes. So, you add those onto Harris's tally and it doesn't look so bad up against Donald Trump. Of course, Pennsylvania is the most valuable of those swing states, 19, and that could be the number that in the end tips either of them over that magic 270. And of course, as we were talking about earlier, Iowa is the one that we will be watching to see if that rogue poll that appeared a couple of days ago carries through. Will those 6 electoral college votes actually make a difference in the end?
So in short, Hugh, there's a lot of twists and turns to come.
Still to come.
Simple as that. All right.
You have to stay with us to find out what happens. Let's go back now to Natalie Barr in Washington, D.C. Nat, the results are coming in thick and fast. What's the reaction been there?
Well, let's go to one of those states that is red, Indiana, Pete Seat's home state. You've got a little one of those twists and turns, a microcosm, if you will. Show us that, what you were talking to me about.
A lot of eyes are on Hamilton County, which is a suburban county just outside of Indianapolis, relatively affluent. And Donald Trump won that county by double digits in 2016. He won it by 9 points in 2020. And right now, with 88% of the vote in, he's up by just about 4 percentage points. Now, what happened in this county in the primary in May is Nikki Haley, who had dropped out by then, got 33% of the vote from Republicans in Hamilton County. So this could be a sign that some of those Nikki Haley Republicans went with Kamala Harris in this election. If that's happening in Hamilton County, it could happen in other suburban counties across the country.
In a county like that, that's traditionally certainly
Exactly. So
not.
You're thinking about the counties around Philadelphia or Milwaukee or perhaps Atlanta, where those suburban Republicans have been unhappy with the direction of the party.
They are caring about them in this election. They are very, very important. Let's talk about turnout, because you're hearing some interesting stories.
Yeah, we've seen reports from college campuses and polling sites around college campuses that turnout is exceedingly high. I saw one anecdote in particular. 5 hours and not know when it was going to end.
Okay, nothing against university students, but he may not have had much else to do. But that's terrible that people are standing in line. How many people would give up and not want to vote?
Well, that's all, and that's why you're seeing both sides. Donald Trump himself is tweeting, "Stay in line, don't leave the line," because as long as you're in line when the polls close, you can vote. And the Harris campaign has been doing the same thing.
Okay, how many voting stations is that happening at across the country?
Well, who knows? I mean, we have seen, as these polls close, we'll probably see some that will remain open for an hour, potentially 2 hours after the official closing time.
Okay, bigger question. Why didn't they mail in?
There are a lot of American voters who are still not comfortable with it. There are some who vote based on tradition. They like to go in. There's still some who talk about pulling the lever. We haven't pulled levers. Not in my entire lifetime have we done that.
What lever? What are we talking about?
Let's just say it was generations ago.
Okay.
But there are folks who just don't like to do mail and absentee voting, but it's becoming more commonplace.
Did they not trust it? Trump said don't trust it for weeks and weeks last time.
That did not help the cause, but Republicans have really pushed it this election cycle, and I think that's why you saw such a high number of early votes.
Right, so it was a record number of votes, 67% last time. It'll be interesting to see the turnout this time. Take home is Kamala can still do it, and that's an interesting point there in a county like that, a staunch Republican one. Lots of twists and turns. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you, Nat.
Let's go now to Canberra, where Hayley Channa from the United States Studies Centre is standing by to have a chat with us. I guess first, obviously, early in the day in terms of counting, but what are you seeing with the results that we've seen so far?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Well, what I wanted to say first up is I know it's a very exciting day. I know everyone's going to see lots of graphics on every network, and I want all of Australia to just take a very deep breath, because we're a long way away from finding out who will be the next president of the United States. It might feel like at any moment this election could be called, but I wouldn't be surprised. Take a deep breath is because often we can forget in the heat of an election campaign what will actually practically be different for Australia after the election. And the truth is, maybe not so excitingly, not a lot is going to change for Australia. And that is because in the security, trade areas of our relationship with the United States, Harris or Trump, it really doesn't matter. Under either candidate, we're still going to push through with AUKUS and our security partnership. We have a free trade agreement with the United States, which puts Australia in a privileged position. And regardless of which president we have in the White House, the US is walking back from free trade. It's turning to tariffs. It did that first under Trump, and Biden continued it, and Harris is likely to continue it even further. The one area of difference that we need to actually watch out for is in the third pillar of our alliance with the United States, and that's on climate change. Donald Trump is famously anti-renewables. He doesn't believe in wind turbines, although his friend Elon Musk is kind of changing his perspective on EVs. But regardless of Harris or Trump, Australia's still in a good position on climate change because we have the critical minerals necessary for the clean energy transition. And Trump will find it very hard to wind back US industrial policy that's been rolled out very rapidly under Harris and Biden. And so that puts Australia in a really good position. So I want your viewers to remember that and not be so afraid of the outcome.
Okay. Well,
I don't think they're afraid of the outcome, are they? Have we said they're afraid of the outcome?
I think there is a lot of concern among everyone I've spoken to Australia about the unpredictability and uncertainty of a Trump presidency, and people are right to be concerned about that. A lot of what we saw in the first Trump presidency was policy by tweet. I'm not pretending that it's going to be any different, but what is important for us to remember is that Australia is the lucky country. There are other countries around the world that are not going to be so lucky. I'm thinking of Israel and Palestine. I'm thinking of Ukraine. Basically, depending on the outcome of the election, the trajectory of those countries will actually be impacted in a sort of existential way. But for Australia, we're privileged.
That is true, but also he has a very close relationship with Putin, and he has ideas that he's going to be able to stop the war in Ukraine, also stop the conflict in Middle East, which no evidence on how he plans to do that in his first week. No one else has managed to do it for centuries. So, and that obviously impacts on petrol prices, which impacts on our cost of living crisis. So I get your point, and you're being very optimistic, and I like it, but I think that they're on a world scale that it's reasonable for Australians to be concerned about what happens if Trump takes office again, because
I completely agree. And obviously what happens in the world does impact Australia. Just like you said, we're paying more for petrol. But I think what's important to note is that yes, we have heard what Trump has said. He said he'll be the peacemaker, and that day one the solutions will come forward. But what is true is that we actually don't know what he will do. And because it's his second term, if he does win, maybe he's just saying a lot of things in the election campaign to win the votes. And when he actually comes to office, he will find he is constrained by Congress. He'll also find he's constrained by the US allies and partners around the world.
All right, Hayley, I tell you what, I've got to jump in there. Appreciate it. Know what you're saying. Good to talk to you there. Let's go back to Miley Hogan now, who's been standing by. We want to get to her straight in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Miley, you've been talking and meeting with the voters there.
Yeah, we've been meeting with a lot of voters in here, a lot of volunteers who've been helping out with the Trump campaign in the suburbs outside of Philadelphia. And I just want to introduce you to Frank. Frank, no secrets who you are supporting tonight.
No, there are no secrets. I'm voting for Donald Trump to be our 47th president.
And what is it about Donald Trump that you like?
I really like his policies. I like what he did when he was president. He secured the border. He built the wall, almost built the wall. They stopped it. He really got the economy going. He's a businessman. He's not a politician. And I like that. I like that a lot.
You were saying before you don't always like the way that he comes across.
That's correct. I don't always like the way he takes on people. He's a counterpuncher. And when somebody comes after him, he goes right back. And sometimes you have to let that go. That's because he's not a politician.
So you're willing to overlook some of that rhetoric?
I am. Because you know what? He's called out. We have a lot of fake media in this country. He's called them out time and time again. And it takes a lot of guts. And it's, you know, he didn't have to take this on. He's a very successful businessman. He's got a huge empire. He could have gone off. He's 78 years old and done his thing. But he loves this country and he loves the American people.
This is a very tight race in this state. It's a pivotal swing state. Do you think that he has the support to win this election here?
I really do. I thought going in, if he was slightly under, even, or up in the polls, that was a really good sign. Because I really never believed the polls in Pennsylvania. And time again, they've underestimated him. And I think they're doing it again. He was up slightly in Pennsylvania, which was a really good sign to me.
Thank you so much for your time.
It was a pleasure meeting you.
Pleasure to meet you. As you move through this room, it's very interesting to speak to the followers here that are rusted on Republicans. They really are Donald Trump supporters. And you can hear the same language that Donald Trump has spoken to the media. Some of those claims baseless, no evidence to back them up. But people inside this room believe those comments from Donald Trump. And you can hear that sentiment again and again echoed over in the crowd of people in this room, guys.
All right, Marty, thank you very much for that. Coming up on this 7 News special, America Decides. The United States has never felt more divided.
Next, we're in Door County, Wisconsin, a swing state where polls will close in the next 15 minutes or so. Stay with us.
We don't have much time, no time to wait.
I base my vote on which closely ties to my religious beliefs.
The politics, they tend to divide not just families, but the nation as a whole.
I think it's dividing households to the point of divorce. Yeah, I think it's getting serious.
Read there on various views across the different states in America and the states that matter as well. And there's a couple of states we haven't had a look at yet. Hugh's got this live data coming in on his electoral map. Hugh, there's 2 states we haven't zoomed in on yet.
Yeah, Michael,
What are those?
and I think, you know, these states are going to end up going certain ways, but Virginia is going to probably end up with Kamala Harris and Texas is going to end up with Donald Trump. But it's probably closer than the candidates and their camps would have expected right now in the early voting. Now, in Virginia, we've got 40% of the vote counted. Harris ahead by 2 percentage points, which is much smaller than what the polls would have predicted, but much of the count has come in from these rural areas in the Appalachians and the Rust Belt area of Virginia. What they're waiting on, Harris, is the vote coming in from much closer into DC, because you've got cities like Arlington in Virginia that are just on the other side of the river from DC, heavy Democrat areas. So we still expect Virginia, 13 electoral votes to end up with Kamala Harris, but it's very tight at the moment. Texas as well is a state where the state is much closer than you would have thought. At the moment, Trump is ahead 53 to 45 for Harris, but it's in the big cities, places like Dallas and Austin, where Harris is ahead by quite a lot. And it's a state where the demographic is changing. It's one that's probably going to be a swing state if not the next election, then the one after that, with a growing Hispanic vote and changes in the demographics in Texas, which probably mean that in 4 to 8 years' time, it's one that the Democrats could claim. And look at that, 40 electoral college votes. It is a hugely valuable state, the second most valuable in the country. It's actually gone up from 38 to 40 since the last election because people are moving to Texas from other states in the US.
That corporate shift in America, Angela, has been interesting, hasn't it? Because Texas moved to get a lot of those tech workers out of California and the northern states there, Hugh, into places like Austin.
It's incredible how the map's changed. When I was there 8 years ago, Florida was still a swing state and Georgia was definitely not. That was red as they come.
Which makes it interesting.
It does make it interesting.
Let's have a look. We're obviously using CNN's direct data for our broadcast, but have a look on the screen now. The New York Times has a thing called the needle. Now, it's shifted heavily. This is different to the data. This is 258 to 280. 280 in Trump's favour. at the moment. This is on the New York Times, as you can see on the full screen there. Now, that's their predictive model, like what we're using in our projections with CNN's data into our wall. What they've done is get ahead of it, I think, and taken a few bold bets at the same time.
Yeah, and probably reading in from how many mail-ins have already come in and the like. But it is blowing up online. Obviously, we'll be keeping an eye on that because, as we say, that is changing by the second. Hugh, what do you think? Hugh, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I think people are looking at not just what is happening live, but also those polls that came in the last couple of days to probably take a look more at these swing states in the blue wall more than anything else, places like Wisconsin, Michigan and Pennsylvania. And in these states, particularly Michigan, where there is a big Muslim population, what has Joe Biden's policies in the Middle East meant for those Arab Americans? Michigan, the strongest Arab American and Muslim American population in the United States. Interestingly, because they all moved to Dearborn in Michigan to work in the Ford factory decades ago, and that population has grown and expanded over the years. That has been a big factor in terms of hampering potentially the Democratic vote, is that policy in the Middle East and towards Gaza and Israel.
Yeah, and it's not just the Arab community. We've seen that with young people across the board, which obviously both candidates are chasing that vote. Now, let's go to US Bureau Chief David Woiwod, who's live at Harris headquarters. Kamala wouldn't be happy with what we've just seen on that New York Times needle. What is the mood there, David?
No, that's going to come as an absolute shock to them, that is for sure, guys. But the party's still going off here at Howard University, although we are in that stage now. You know, when you go to a party and there's that very small core group trying to get the dance floor started, that is the atmosphere here at the moment. There's a little bit happening. They've had the gospel singers out, we've had the break dancers out, but certainly no one is giving themselves permission to actually celebrate anything at this point. And no wonder, just having a look at that data that is now being projected there by the New York Times and others. We're still just waiting for all of those results to keep on coming in. But we know why Kamala Harris has chosen this venue here tonight. Of course, it is her old university. She studied here back in the early 1980s. She got her degree in economics and politics. And in particular, this quad here, if we can just pan around, where the world's media is now gathered, hundreds and hundreds of people on this riser here, awaiting the Vice President to arrive here later on in the night. But this was a really formative place for Kamala Harris during her education. She studied here. It formed a lot of her political views and opinions, and it's where she's made a number of her friends and, of course, her political allies that are still with her to this day. So, look, the party, it's trying to go off at the moment, guys, but we still need to see some more results until that happens.
Right, Dave, thank you very much. We'll keep coming back to you. Keith Suter at the desk. Let me just bring you in, go back to that New York Times needle, which is a real shift. That's a change that we're reporting right now. Your take on that, predicting Trump over Harris quite significantly.
Yes, absolutely. And I think if the election goes against the Democrats, there'll be a search for scapegoats. And the two obvious categories of scapegoats will be young black males who did not vote in sufficient numbers for Kamala Harris, and secondly, Arab Americans. So they'll be the ones who are held to blame. Plus, there's always the Green Party. Remember, the Green Party was held partly responsible for the 2000 election loss by Al Gore. So the Democrats, if they lose, will be on a search for scapegoats, and I think that they are the standard targets.
But the other...
There it is there as well, Angela. Just point that out again. This is a live feed from the New York Times. This is the Electoral College estimate. These are their projections in the New York Times. 279 leading Trump over Harris, 259. But on their other needle, just to the left, chance of winning, not sure. It's still a toss-up. Yeah, so exactly. There's a difference, isn't there, Keith? There's getting the votes and actually winning are two different things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're talking about scapegoats. Obviously, the other one would be Kamala Harris herself.
Yep.
It's not over yet by any means,
no.
Obviously. This is still changing, but looking at how she's managed this, and to be honest, she's had 3 months. Normally, they have a year and a half. So she's done incredibly well just to be competitive, given the low approval rating of Biden, who she took over from. So, but anything she's done wrong, has she done enough to distinguish herself from Biden?
Well, she was very loath at the beginning to do standard media interviews, whereas Trump, of course, is a media tart. He loves being interviewed. Oh. She was very slow to do that. She's not a particularly spontaneous person. Her speeches, which we only get small clips of, but her speeches are always the same from one place to another. So there's a high degree of repetition. So she's someone who's very tightly controlled without the spontaneity of Trump. But you're right, she's only had a few months in which to bring the campaign to this point. If it had been Biden running again, it would have been a Trump victory right from the outset. but clearly she's giving him a good fight.
Absolutely. And there has been criticism about her not being authentic enough, like Trump. She said that's called discipline, which we don't see from Donald Trump. Thank you, Keith.
Let's bring in Republican commentator Ben Ferguson, joining us live from Texas now. Ben, you're listening in with interest. We're just talking about this New York Times needle shifting in favour of Donald Trump quite heavily at this stage. Still a projection. What are you thinking?
Yeah, look, I think this is going to be significant tonight, and I think this is going to be exactly what I was expecting to happen, which is these early vote numbers that came out were shocking for many Republican pollsters. Pollsters that were looking at this, what we saw is that Republicans were going to show up in massive numbers in early voting, and that's not traditional. These numbers are very different than what we saw in 2020, and they look a lot more like what we witnessed in 2016. And that's why there was so much confidence going into tonight for Trump's team. They learned a lot from the loss last time to Joe Biden, and they understood the ground game, I think, much better. They understood how important it was to have a ground game in many of these swing states as well. That is paying off with early voting and also registering Republican voters or likely Republican voters to vote for him. And I think they just ran a much more disciplined campaign. And look, Kamala Harris, I think, thought, I'm going to go on TV. I'm going to buy this election. I'm going to have a basement strategy. I'm not going to do a lot of interviews. I think that backfired on her. And this closing argument from her team and the disaster, which was the moment where the president of the United States of America, Joe Biden, called half of American voters garbage, and to the point where Americans were so angry that grocery stores ran out of garbage bags as outfits for Halloween. That irritated a lot of voters.
Okay, but I've got to pull you up on this because that obviously started from one of Donald Trump's supporters getting up in Madison Square Garden calling Puerto Rico an island of rubbish. A comedian that was vetted, it was on the auto cue. Donald Trump knew what he was going to say. I mean, so I get your point. Biden clearly misspoke and shouldn't have said that. But would you agree that Donald Trump, he's chaotic, he's natural, he's an entertainer, he's always like that, he says things off the cuff. But the past couple of weeks, as this campaign has come to an end, he seems to have got more, not unhinged, I shouldn't say, that's definitely a Democrat's word, but certainly more loose with what he's saying and a lot more volatile in his conversation. I mean, he's been a bit of a train wreck the past couple of weeks.
I think the voters completely disagree with what you just said, and we're seeing that in the numbers. And so I understand that there's been a spin that, oh, Donald Trump's unhinged or he's crazy or he's radical. It's a talking point that's been used so often by people on the left, by Kamala Harris, by the media in this country, that it turned into white noise. And a comedian who rips on everybody. I mean, he ripped on and became famous after hammering Tom Brady, a quarterback, relentlessly. And that was his big night. People expect something different from a comedian that watch, and they understand it's a comedian that offends everyone, and they don't expect it from the sitting president of the United States of America. And if the Democrats thought that they were going to be able to play this well, a comedian said something. So the president of the United States of America, who's supposed to unite the country and is supposed to be a guy that he claimed it was going to be a connector and not a divider, calls half of the country who's going to be voting floating trash. And that's your closing argument to the American people before the election.
Yeah.
It can cost you an election. And that's the reality, not a comedian.
Ben, I've got a question for you, which I'm going to get you to answer. But as we do this, I'm just checking, we're 10 seconds away from 13 of these key states closing. We'll have a look at that on the wall. These are the key states about to come in just a couple of seconds, and we'll get to the results. But do you think this decision, America's decision, was made up in their minds some weeks ago? Certainly not in the last week, as we've been discussing. But the size of the mail-in vote, I can't read on who that favours. What are your views on that?
Yeah, no, look, the early voting numbers are just absolutely massive. And I actually think that this campaign, if you go back and Harvard will break down this campaign afterwards, and they'll look at flashpoints and moments. I think actually the moment where Donald Trump had a major surge and people decided to go early vote was number one, when Kamala Harris came out and talked about price controls at grocery stores, but didn't understand those price controls and didn't understand she was advocating for communist price controls that have never worked anywhere in the world. That's a flashpoint, and we saw that in the data, and it worked well with candidates that ran on the issue and started running ads on that. The second flashpoint, I think, was even bigger than that, dealt with the border. When it was announced by ICE that the Harris and Biden White House knowingly caught well over 10,000 convicted murderers at at the southern border, knew they'd been convicted of murder in another country, and released them into the interior in the U.S. And then it came out that there was almost 20,000 that had been convicted of rape that they caught at the southern border. And then they were released. Now, this is ICE that gave the numbers. ICE, who is underneath Joe Biden.
Just broadly, though, Ben, if we're talking about the issue.
In that moment, I'm telling you, that was the moment.
Yeah. Okay. This is the single subject of immigration. So many people watching on from, far afield like we are in Australia saying, why did Trump campaign on immigration? Why didn't he campaign on the fact that, he ran the country for 4 years, he's got a track record, particularly on things like the economy, all of the polling suggesting that the top 4 or 5 issues were all about inflation, cost of living, but he campaigned primarily on immigration. You're saying a clever strategy, because this is what it's playing into all the information that you just said. Whilst you answer it too, I'll just say it's just gone past 1 p.m. daylight Eastern time in Australia. Ben, I'm going to get you to stay there. In fact, I do want you to answer that question, but because these polls are just closing, I know Hugh's having a look at some of the data coming in now. Hugh, go to you.
Yeah, Michael, we've just had a whole heap of projections that we've made for states with Donald Trump racing ahead with 154 electoral college votes now. So we are saying that North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming and Texas, and those valuable 40 electoral college votes, will land with Donald Trump. Now, these 3 states up here, these very rural, lightly populated states, 3, the minimum number of electoral college votes that any state has, we would have expected that they would have gone for Donald Trump regardless. Places like South Dakota and North Dakota, I don't think have voted for a Democratic candidate since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. They are ruby red states, and they will have been always in Donald Trump's column. And a whole heap of states that have just closed, as we mentioned. So we are now awaiting results in places like New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, where we know about that rogue poll, Minnesota, which is Tim Walz, the Democratic VP candidate, also places like Illinois, Mississippi and Louisiana too.
All right, Hugh, thanks. Ben Ferguson, let's bring you back in, Republican insider, close advisor to Ted Cruz, the Republican senator as well. Would you call it at this stage, looking at that map?
No, I'm looking at Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is what I'm going to look at in the swing states. As much as I would love to say, I think it's over, I'm a realist and I look at the data and I look at the numbers. Right now, what I'm witnessing is exactly what I was expecting. And I do think it's going to tighten up a little bit. I mean, you look at 27 to 154 on the screen right there, but I'm looking at Pennsylvania. And if I see Pennsylvania go for Donald Trump, that's when you're going to see a grin on my face as big as the Joker from the movie. This is going to be that moment where you go, oh my gosh, this is going to be a huge night for him. So I'm a swing state guy.
So not as confident as you would make out. You think this is still too close to call?
At this point in the night, yeah, because I mean, look, there's a million people that will go on TV and they'll try to make a moment, go, I called it this early in the night. That's not what I do. I'm a realist here. We've seen recounts in Florida that lasted for 30-something days. We've seen it where it took a couple of days to figure it out. We've seen where states have had issues with their collecting their data, and it's been 2 days before we got the numbers in here. If I'm Donald Trump right now and I'm sitting in the hotel and I'm looking at the TV, am I grinning? Yes. If I'm Kamala Harris and the Democrats right now, or I'm on MSNBC at America, I am having and looking like I could be talking about a funeral of Kamala Harris's political career. That is certainly where the mindset is. But I'm not going to sit here and say too early in the night, oh, yeah, it's all over. There's still people voting in America right now in several swing states, especially in Arizona, New Mexico, and parts out in the West.
Ben, we've really appreciated talking to you. Great insights. We'd like to come back to you throughout the day. We'll chat with you soon. Let's go back now to Natalie Barr in Washington, D.C. She's with former White House insider Pete Seeg.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's so interesting what Ben was saying on how Donald Trump speaks to people. We were just talking about it. There was a moment when he got off the garbage truck, he went into the rally, and then he spent 10 minutes describing why he was in a high-vis vest. And his people had wanted him to wear the suit, had wanted him to wear the vest. And he said, no, give me the suit, give me the suit. And then he said, well, no, I look better in the suit. And they said, sir, you look thinner in the high-vis vest. And then he said, I'll wear the high-vis vest. And he has people eating out of his hands, whether you like him or not. He connects, doesn't
Well,
he?
I think about a quote from Jason Sudeikis, who, of course, played Ted Lasso. And he said, if your dominant emotion is confusion, then the audience doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. And there's nothing confusing about Donald Trump when he speaks. It's clear and it's easy to understand. As a communications consultant, I tell people this all the time in giving presentations. I say, take a transcript of Donald Trump's remarks, put it in the Flesch-Kincaid model, which will give you a grade level for the verbiage, and it normally comes out between 6th grade and 8th grade.
Right.
Politicians in this country like to speak like they're playing Scrabble, and they want to impress you with how many syllables they can speak at once. Donald Trump, the anti-politician when it comes to speaking.
Because he was proud of his weave, as he called it, that he would weave in and out. He went on Joe Rogan and spoke for 3 hours, and he was proud of weaving in and out, and that's how long it took him to speak. People then criticised her for her word salad. What was the difference?
Well, because you can't tell what she's trying to convey. She's not clear. She, in this race, did not have concise and clear policies, and she had a very short runway to introduce herself. That was a big challenge for Kamala Harris. But when you say eating up Trump's words, I've been to several rallies of his. And he's got the greatest hits. It's like seeing Elton John or Billy Joel, right? They play Piano Man and Crocodile Rock. Everyone's cheering. He starts the lock her up chant about Hillary Clinton. Or he talks about Sleepy Joe, Joe Biden. People are laughing, they're clapping, they love all of it. He lets you behind the veil.
Right.
He lets you in and makes you feel like you're part of his inner circle.
But then he says, I'm the father of IVF. I'm the father of fertilisation. I've done more for farmers than any president in United States history. They're obviously lies, so people don't care about that?
Well, his most ardent supporters will tell you the opposite. They will tell you that it is stone cold truth. And they will scream that from this very rooftop if they had the opportunity to do that. But I think a lot of voters, they've listened to Donald Trump now for 9.5 going on 10 years as a candidate for president and as president. They've learned that a lot of what he says is not entirely accurate, or he's not going to necessarily follow through on it. And that has played to his advantage.
And that's interesting, because there is a bit of a myth that the people who vote for Trump are the bros, or they're middle-aged, uneducated white males. That's becoming a bit of a myth, isn't it? For example, the Latino vote.
Yeah, the Latino vote has been so interesting to watch in this election cycle, because before it was monolithic, and largely Latinos voted for Democrats. But you're seeing a lot move towards Donald Trump, and particularly Latino men. NBC News just put out an exit poll a few minutes ago. 54% to 44%, a 10-point margin. Donald Trump is leading Kamala Harris with Latino men. It was 23 points for Biden in 2020. So that's a 33-point swing in Donald Trump's direction from Latino men.
Okay, because they're often small business owners. He talks about the economy, but he's going to kick them out, isn't he?
Well, they don't believe that.
Okay. There you go. It's fascinating, isn't it? Back to you guys in the studio.
Nat, Pete, thank you very much for that. Just a quick check-in of that New York Times needle that we've been talking about as well. It's increased again, predicting, this is all projection, 280 seats to 258 for Kamala Harris, although if you look at the left one, still a toss-up, no clear leader. Hugh Whitfield, on that, let's bring you in as well. Are we seeing the red mirage at this stage? Is this a real trend toward Donald Trump? Give us a view. Or have Kamala Harris's favourite states not come in yet?
I think we're waiting on results, but we have just got another state called for Kamala Harris, pushing her up to 30 electoral college votes. That's Delaware, which is Joe Biden's home state, so 3 electoral college votes there. Interestingly, up here in the northeast of the United States, places like New Hampshire, we're still expecting New Hampshire to go to Harris, but her vote isn't as strong as it was for Joe Biden 4 years ago. Similar in Virginia, we were talking about that split between the rural and urban vote in Virginia. It is very tight there at the moment. Still Kamala Harris ahead with 50% of the vote, Trump on 48%, but it's not as strong for her there as Joe Biden 4 years ago. We were talking about Pennsylvania as well, guys, one of those, or the most key of the 7 swing states. Now, the latest figures in from there show Harris surging ahead a bit, 17% of the vote in. Harris, 61%. Trump, 38%. That is up about 10% for Harris. Trump coming off there a bit. Obviously, as they open different booths and different ballot boxes and different batches of mail-in votes as they come in from various parts of the state, it's going to be a factor. But as we were talking about with our guest there and those garbage comments, the thing in Pennsylvania is I think we've got 600,000 Latino voters in Pennsylvania, 300,000 from Puerto Rico, which is that US territory that was targeted with the garbage comments by the comedian at the Madison Square Garden rally by Donald Trump. So whether or not that is a big factor in Pennsylvania, we're going to find out.
Just go back to Pennsylvania, Hugh. Just do those numbers you repeated, because this is the one, if you're playing along at home, obviously, just have a look at Pennsylvania as one example of where this is all headed at the moment. A lot of red on the board. Some of those expected, none of those great surprises, an early red wave for Donald Trump. But it's Pennsylvania and some early counting in favour of Harris. Just repeat that again.
Yeah, that's right. So 17% of the count voted in Pennsylvania, 61% for Harris. About an hour ago when we were talking about Pennsylvania, we were talking about 51% for Harris. So surged ahead by 10%, 38% for Trump in Pennsylvania right now.
Just to clarify, if we ignore the New York Times needle, because it's still saying still too close to call, we look at your map, lots of red, not much blue, but just to reiterate, she's still got a clear path to victory based on what's left.
The path is there. We haven't called any of the swing states, and that is the path for the both of them, these 7 key swing states.
All right, Hugh, thank you. We're getting to that really fascinating stage now where a lot of the true counting is coming in. We're starting to see real numbers. Obviously, some of the Trump camp are getting excited about that. Kamala Harris, as people were told, are sitting back and watching because there's a lot of those states coming in. I'm
sure they are. Elbows.
Absolutely sure they are, but it's those swing states, like we said at the very beginning, like Ben Ferguson told us as well. He's a swing guy. He's going to watch those swing states, the 7 key states.
Yep. Coming up on our rolling coverage of the US election, Tony Holt Kramer, one of the famous Trumpettes, a group of women rallying for the Republican.
This is a live look at the vote count right underway in New Hampshire. We'll go back to our data center. That's coming up next. Stay with us. Good to have you Good to have your company on our 7 News live coverage of the US presidential election. We're looking at live pictures right there inside Trump's headquarters of Mar-a-Lago. His fans, his supporters getting ready for what they believe would be a celebration ahead, and eyes turned to the stage area where I'm guessing they would be hoping to see Donald Trump at some stage.
Yep, and that's where we find Trumpette Tony Holt Kramer, who is joining us from Mar-a-Lago. Thanks so much for your time. Tell us, what is the atmosphere like there at the moment?
It is extraordinary. It is so exciting. I cannot even tell you. I have been at many big events through the years since I started the Trumpettes. And of course, there is nothing more extraordinary than tonight. It is packed with every celebrity, political, that you can think of, and a lot of show people. The president is here. President Trump just arrived. He's sitting at a table with Elon Musk. RFK Jr. is here. We just have tons of celebrities here. And most important, your biggest celebrity in Australia is with me at my table. Gina Reinhardt is here. And she looks phenomenal in her Western Australian hat. And Tina McQueen is here. So we've got all of Australia. Very, very important notables who love your country.
Well, that's an inside scoop for us, Tony.
And I want to say hello to all the chapters that we have in Australia as well.
Okay.
All of you. We have so many chapters for the last 7 or 8 years. Thank you for all the hard work that you all do.
Well, that's an inside scoop there that Gina Reinhardt is there, the mining billionaire. Did you have a word to her? What did she say?
Oh, yes, we're sitting together. We're all friends since, I think, 7 or 8 years. And she is really, I would say, Gina is to Australia what President Trump is to America. She wants to see nothing but good for your country. She wants to see everything that would make your country better and better and better. And she's the most devoted woman I know, and has always been from the day one that I met her. I think it was 2018 when President Trump was 45. And tonight, I'm pretty sure we're going to welcome in 47. He's going to be the 47th president of the United States. There's no doubt about it. So he is going to win.
So you said Donald Trump was in the room there, that he's taken a seat with Elon Musk. Has he been able to pop over to your table to say hi to you and Gina?
He just arrived about 1 minute before I came out to the pool so I could do this interview with you. And when I go back in, I will see him. And Elon Musk is here with his son. We have Robert Kennedy Jr. here. We have, my goodness, who don't we have here? We have so many people here. We're being filmed as we talk to you for other shows around the country, around Europe.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there are, Tony, any other notable Australians in the room. I know Anthony Pratt, another Australian billionaire, is a supporter.
Well, we also have Nigel. Nigel is not an Australian, but he's here.
Nigel Farage
is here.
Okay, yep.
We have, I mean, it's just unbelievable. You can't say hello quickly enough to everybody because it just keeps changing. Yes, you do have your most fabulous columnist here who works for the New York Post, I believe.
Right, okay.
You know who I'm talking about?
You'll have to tell us. Yeah. There's a few. Is that Miranda Devine, is it? Or is it...
Miranda Devine.
Yeah, okay.
There we
go.
And Miranda Devine is divine. I mean, she really is.
Well, there's a strong Australian
very
presence in the room.
Yeah,
a good, strong Australian presence in the room.
We have a lot of Aussies. And my table is mostly Aussies.
Do you think we're going to hear from Donald Trump tonight, Tony? I mean, obviously, there's some speculation he may well come out and talk before there's a clear closure of the polls, or the count at the very least, on the west coast of America. Do you think he'll speak before that?
I don't know. If he does, I think he'll probably speak at the convention center if he speaks. I don't think he'll speak here. But then again, I never can second guess him. I wouldn't even attempt to. By the time I walk back in the room, he could be addressing the whole ballroom. You never know with him.
Yeah.
He will do what he feels like doing because he loves, adores, and wants to make America really great, fabulous, safe, successful. All the bad things that have gone on here the last 4 years will disappear with him. I promise you. And let me tell you something. He's not going to drag his heels either. You know, he deserves this presidency. He has devoted his life, really the last 8-9 years, to America.
Okay, well,
And
I feel...
he didn't need to do that. He didn't need to do that.
Thank you so much.
He's doing it because he loves this
We might just jump
country,
in.
and he will make it great again.
So we don't want to
Good
hold
idea.
you from the party any longer, Tony. Thank you so
Jump on
much
in.
for joining us.
Thank
We
you so
appreciate it.
much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's bring in lawyer Benjamin Chew now, who's been standing by. We had to rudely cut off Tony there, but we wanted to get to Benjamin Chew from Washington, D.C. Bit of a legal view of all of this. Benjamin, both sides are lawyering up, as we've heard, just in case the dispute is, in some... The result is disputed, I should say. What's your view, Benjamin?
Yes, I think in the event that the former president loses, he's already signaled that he will challenge the election as he did unsuccessfully last time. I think the vice president also wisely has assembled a very robust team of attorneys to respond to that. So I think they're mostly in a defensive mode.
And just in terms of other legal issues, after this election, once we get through today, in a few weeks' time, Donald Trump is due to be sentenced over some of the criminal charges against him. How does that work if he becomes president or if he doesn't?
Well, that's a fascinating question. Actually, Judge Marchand, as you said, is due to sentence former President Trump later this month based on the 34 felony convictions. That will be unaffected by whether he wins the election or not, because that's a state court prosecution. There's nothing he can do to stop that, even if he becomes president. He can't pardon himself. That will take place no matter what. What he can do if he is elected again, and he's already pledged to do it, is that he will quash the two pending federal prosecutions against him. That is the charges based on the January 6th insurrection and the currently dismissed but likely to be reinstated charges relating to his violations with respect to the classified documents. If reelected, he will instruct his new attorney general to stop those prosecutions. If he loses, those prosecutions will go forward as scheduled.
Benjamin, thank you. Very briefly, because we're going to go to some more results now at our wall. I know you represented Johnny Depp doing his trial. What could be the more interesting legal challenge after all of this? How would it stack up representing Johnny Depp versus what Donald Trump could do?
It's not going to be remotely as interesting or rewarding as representing Johnny Depp, who's a good man.
I'm glad you said that. All right, good on you, Benjamin.
Thank
you very much. Hugh, let's go back to you at the wall now. I know there's a lot more coming through, and there's some more fine detail in the smaller votes in those counties in various states. What have you got?
Yeah, that's right. We've got two more states that we are prepared to project for Kamala Harris. Illinois, the home of Chicago, Barack Obama's home state, 19 electoral college votes, incredibly valuable. Was probably always going to fall to the Democratic candidate, but that Illinois 19 votes goes to Kamala Harris. The other one is Rhode Island here in the northeast of the US, 4 electoral college votes for Kamala Harris. So on the road to the race to 270 right now, Donald Trump on 154, Kamala Harris on 53. Now, there is one state that I think is kind of interesting at the moment, and that is Kansas, where 39% of the vote is in so far. Now, Australians probably think of Kansas as, plains and wheat fields and cornfields and things like that from storybooks and The Wizard of Oz. The thing in Kansas is right now, with 39% of the vote counted, 51% of the vote is with Kamala Harris. 47% with Trump. Now, we still expect that Trump will catch up and overtake Kamala Harris and take the state of Kansas, but it is incredibly tight and Kamala Harris is ahead, particularly in the suburbs around Kansas City, which is actually technically in Missouri, the suburbs in Kansas City and also in the city of Wichita as well, where Kamala Harris is ahead. So she is taking those suburban voters with her, and Donald Trump is sweeping up the rural and lightly populated counties, but one to watch there in Kansas.
Hugh, so just to do a time check for us. So we've got almost 9:30 on the east coast of America, 6:30 on the west coast. On your map that you're looking at there, which is still pretty grey, it doesn't look like it's in play, but there's going to be a lot of blue headed to the west coast pretty soon, isn't there, when those results come through?
Yeah, that's right. We're still waiting on results, obviously, from Colorado and New Mexico. We would expect that they would both go for Kamala Harris, although Donald Trump turned up in New Mexico last week, I think, and decided to tell everyone that it was potentially in play. It's not out of the question, but at this stage we would say Colorado and New Mexico will go for the Democrats. Minnesota here as well, 10 electoral college votes. That is Tim Walz's home state, the VP candidate for the Democrats.
All right, Hugh,
interesting.
Thank you very much.
I think the Trump camp was saying that they thought they'd get New Hampshire as well, which is not actually one of the swing states. Let's update you on that New York Times needle, because there has been a little bit of a change. You'll have a look at that, and it was saying a toss-up on that chance of victory. It's now leaning Trump, 67% chance of a victory. So you've got 253 for Harris, 285 for Trump. That is significant because before it was still saying too close to call.
Projected at this stage. The way the New York Times clarifies that, I'll just read it from their website as well, is that Trump is a narrow but clear favourite to win Georgia and North Carolina. If he does, Harris would probably need to sweep the 3 northern swing states, a possibility but a tall order. So fairly strong projections there from the New York Times. You're watching a rolling coverage for the US election on 7 News as the vote count continues. Our reporters are right across all the key grounds on key locations in the United States.
We will check in with them soon. We are back in a moment.
Really good to have your company here on 7 News. Live shots there of what we're calling Harris headquarters. That's outside Howard University, where there's quite a stage set up, a whole theatre of celebration, and a lot of people just watching all the results on the screens there of the various rolling coverage there in the United States. That's the Harris campaign and supporters there. It is really starting to twist and turn. At this stage, some really good-looking numbers for Donald Trump, so there might be some concern in amongst those Harris supporters.
Now, it is an election race that's shaping up as one of the tightest in history, and there are plenty of people keeping a close eye here at home. Let's go live now to Chris Marr, who's at a Democratic watch party in Sydney. Chris, plenty of keen observers there too.
Well, as you can see, it's very, very noisy here. This is at the Kent Street Hotel. It's an election watch party that's been organised by the Democrats Abroad Australia. Now, there's plenty of American themes here, of course, American beers, there's burgers, there's a cutout figure of Kamala Harris that you can have your photograph taken. People, of course, glued to the screens here. Hundreds have been coming and going during the day and been watching the ebb and flow of this election result, cheering whenever a Democrat has an edge. Now, with me, I have Amy Saha, who is from California, originally lives in Sydney. And Amy, can I ask you, this is your big event, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. And you can get a sense of the energy in the room. Everybody is here and really looking forward to hear about her victory. Yeah.
And talk, so you're meeting people, aren't you?
Yeah, meeting all sorts of people. We're meeting people from all different states that have come to Australia. We have some Kiwis here, and we also have a lot of Australian supporters with us, which is wonderful to see.
And so what are your thoughts at the moment, watching these results come in?
Yeah, I mean, it's still something just broke, but so far everything that's come through is exactly as we expected it to. We're really looking at those battleground states. So, we're really looking forward to the victory later.
Are you expecting a long night here?
It may even be longer than a long night. There are a lot of those early votes to be counted. There's about 80 million Americans who have voted before Election Day, and all of that is going to take some time.
And what's it like for Americans watching it from afar, watching the election unfold and now reaching this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We're still very much invested in the results. When we look at what's at stake, when we think about abortion rights, when we think about what would be best for our families back at home, and just how dark he's been, the things that he's threatened to do. So we're very much invested in the results and looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you. And so here we are at the Democrats watch party. Now, just down the road here on Kent Street, the Republicans have also organised a watch party in another hotel. And it could be a long night for both events.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, Chris Marr, thanks so much.
Of interest, there's about potentially, I think, Angela, about 100,000 voters in Australia who could cast their vote if they all registered. So there's a little bit of influence here in Australia.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go back to Hugh at the data wall, because Hugh, you have new numbers coming in for Georgia.
Yeah, and Michael, there's three states I want to talk about: New York, North Carolina and Georgia. We'll come to Georgia in a moment. We've just projected New York, 28 electoral college votes for Kamala Harris. The vote in there, 65% Harris, 35% Trump. To be honest, not a big surprise, but one that will be a big relief to Kamala Harris's camp because it boosts her number significantly. So up to 81 and 154 in the race to 270. Now, during COVID, a lot of people, or quite a few people, moved from places like New York down to places like North Carolina, to smaller, kind of medium-sized cities like Raleigh in North Carolina, and that has seen the vote in North Carolina shift. That's why this time it is one of our 7 swing states. Now, at the moment, Trump is ahead, but only just 51% to 47% for Harris, with 55% of the vote in. And in Georgia, it is narrowing significantly as the vote comes in. 74% of the vote already counted in Georgia, and Trump is on 53%. Harris is on 47%. Earlier, when it was just 25% of the vote in, it was 62-39. So it is narrowing as those votes come in Georgia. Harris very strong in the suburbs around Atlanta, a very large black population in Atlanta, Savannah over on the coast as well. Trump sweeping up those regional counties.
Hugh, if you just come in our coverage now, just point to those big numbers at the top of the screen, please, where we've got, this is live data out of CNN, the United States. The Republicans, Trump 154, Democrats, Harris 81. If you tuned in right now, you'd think Trump's got a landslide on his hands. Just put that all in context for us.
Yeah, look, it is confusing because it is an electoral system like really no other in the world, to speak Donald Trump's language. 270 is the number they need to win a majority in the Electoral College. Each state has a different number of Electoral College votes. It is actually based on the number of senators that each state has, combined with the number of representatives that they have in the House of Representatives, the lower house of the US Congress. So, for example, example, the most populous state, 54 in California, 2 senators, 52 members in the House, and a state like Wyoming, the lowest population in the country, 2 senators, as every state has, and 1 Congress member in the lower house. So that's how they work it out. It's roughly based on population, but it means that a vote in Wyoming is actually worth more than in somewhere like California.
And briefly, I want to talk about, the world is going nuts at the moment about this New York Times poll coming out at the moment, Angela. I'll bring it up in front of me. But just whilst I bring that up, Hugh, the boxes behind you, if geographically some of those states, well, there it is now, 286, this is the New York Times needle, their projections saying that 286 to 252. And now, if you look at the indicator on the left, the needle on the left, this is the first time the New York Times has started pushing into the region of saying it's leaning toward a Trump victory, a 68% chance of victory. This is based on their algorithm, based on their numbers that getting with all of their count and live data as well. So we'll show you this from the New York Times as we keep going forward, plus our data from CNN. Hugh, just briefly back on the wall, the boxes behind you. If geographically some of those northeast corner states were larger, you'd see a lot more blue on the board, but we're putting them in those boxes there, those various states.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can see New York, obviously, 28 electoral college votes. New York City is the largest city in America. California has more bigger cities than New York. Places like Massachusetts as well, that's where Boston is. Maryland, which takes in Baltimore and all those suburbs around Washington, D.C. So huge amount of people. It's just tightly packed on the map, which is why we break it out here. You're going to see a lot of red fill in here over the next couple of hours, places like Nebraska and Kansas, but the whole West Coast will go blue. California, Oregon and Washington. Hawaii, we would say for the Democrats. Alaska, we'd probably say for the Republicans, but, you know, there is a reality potentially where Alaska could flip, but at this stage, I reckon we'd say Trump.
Never done that.
All right, so in short, there is still a pathway to victory there for Kamala Harris, but there's a lot more to go. Hugh, thanks. Let's go straight back to Nat Barr in DC with White House insider Pete Seat. You're both watching this New York Times needle predictor as well, that's getting a lot of traction out there online, and they're saying leaning toward a Trump victory.
Exactly. Pete, as someone who's watched that map at this stage of the night all your life and who's been on the inside, what do you say about all that red?
Well, the conversation that was taking place there is so important because, you know, they talk about the red mirage. There's a lot of states that hit the board red very early. They're smaller states. They count quickly. Their polls close earlier than other states. New York, reliably blue. It's going to go for Kamala Harris. Just got on the board. And if you look at what seems to be a commanding lead in the Electoral College for Donald Trump right now, California, Oregon, Washington, all on the West Coast. If those 3 states were called right now, it would wipe out Donald Trump's Electoral College lead as it stands at this moment.
Okay, but we did see the New York Times projection saying Trump. That's a projection. That's not based on these numbers at the moment, though. That's what they think will happen.
Yeah, and they're projecting that based on the exit polling data that they're seeing, returns from states that have already tabulated those, whether they be from urban communities, rural communities, suburban communities. But let's keep in mind, Kamala Harris, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. That's all she needs. Unless some states surprise us and flip that are unexpected, she gets those 3, it's 270, it's over. So Donald Trump winning North Carolina, Georgia, all good news, but it doesn't necessarily lead to 270.
Okay, repeat those because they're the Rust Belt states, aren't they, that we have heard, and probably not many Australians even really know where they are.
Yeah, so it's also called the Blue Wall. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they tend to vote in a block. If Donald Trump can pick one of those off, he's going to have a great night. But if they stick together, especially for Kamala Harris, she's the next president.
So these are those ones up the top in grey that formed that sort of wall. They were the industrial hub of the United States years ago, weren't they? And then things changed in the 70s. Now the factories literally were sitting there rusting. Is that why they're called the Rust Belt?
Yes, that's precisely why. And working class voters, the type of voters who live in those states, have been moving towards Donald Trump. They now make up a large part of the Republican Party. And particularly if you look at unions, union labor leadership remains in the Democratic coalition, but the rank and file of those unions are starting to move towards Republicans.
Okay.
And that makes it promising for Trump.
So they flip because we saw Obama win them, then we saw Trump win them, then we saw Biden win them. These people just, they vote on what is good for them at the time. Is that right?
Well, and they like the attention.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And, there's a lot of media there asking
Right.
them questions. No, but these swing states, they move based on what's happening, how they feel in the moment, if they're dissatisfied, if they're happy with the direction of the country, and yes, their self-economic interests. And if right now they're looking at affordability, they're looking at inflation, they're probably going to go with Trump. But if they're looking at democracy and abortion, they go with Kamala Harris.
Okay, too early. Thank you very much, Pete. Back to you guys.
All right, Nat, thanks for that. Keith Suter, let's bring you in on the desk now because there's a lot to really chew over at the moment. Those 3 states that we're still watching, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And I just got told in my ear then in Georgia, 75% of the vote counted, leaning toward Trump, but some of the Atlanta areas around the main city there, Harris is going to need to pull something out of the bag there.
Absolutely. So her strength will be in the cities. So we have to wait and see just how those results come in. If you remember, that's one of the issues which Trump had when he rang Brad Raffensperger 4 years ago, saying he needed 11,000 votes to move Georgia back into his column. So it's going to be a very close run thing indeed, may be open to challenge. We're expecting a lot of legal challenges. Yeah. So this will be an area where you can expect legal challenges.
Hey, what do you make of the New York Times needle? I mean, it's bold.
I'm intrigued by where they're getting this from. And the polls have been so off for so many years.
Yeah.
Is this another example of, we can't even trust this?
It's based on count, not poll, but that's their algorithm that they're using.
It's an algorithm, so that's the key thing. Now, is the algorithm based on all what we've known about previous elections going back for several years, or is it just simply adding up what we're seeing at the moment?
And have they got the thumb on the scales and weighting it based on information they've gleaned from previous elections?
You're not saying it's rigged, are you, Angela Cox?
I'm certainly not saying it's rigged, but
rigged.
a lot of the pollsters have tried to tweak things a bit because they made so many misses on Donald Trump voters in the past few elections. So it's just fascinating that they've been able to come out like that so quickly. But I think the message from Washington was take a deep breath. The most important states are Michigan, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin.
Here's the only thing we know for sure. Hugh Whitfeld's going to get it right. His map and his data, our data is excellent. We got you.
We're going to be okay.
I think Pete Seat was really wise there. Just watch those 3 states. And this is going to be the great thing in the next hour or two, because this is the, as we've hosted a few of these things before, and if you're watching from home, you'll understand this as well. Make yourself a quick sandwich now, but don't go too far, because this in the next hour or so it really starts to shift around.
Gets exciting. You are watching our rolling coverage of the wildest election in history.
As we go to a break with a live look at the vote count, that's in Denver. We haven't had a look at that yet. So is Donald Trump on the road back to the White House? Some are getting excited about it. We'll find out. We're back in a moment.
Welcome back to America Decides. From 7 News, you are looking at pictures from Trump headquarters in Mar-a-Lago.
Interestingly, Australia's richest person, Gina Rinehart, we're told is one of the guests there tonight. She's bought one of the key tables. So will she see Donald Trump claim a victory in that room a little later on?
Now, 7 News political editor Mark Riley joins us. Riles, this election is being closely watched back here.
Yeah, guys, I can tell you, I think all the monitors in Parliament House here, and there's something like 5,500 of them, are all tuned to the election coverage at the moment, trying to work out what's going to happen. It's very tight, isn't it? Which is quite interesting. And I guess there are 2 possible outcomes, obviously. A Harris win would be pretty much a continuation of business as usual, as Australia and the US have conducted over the years of the Biden administration. A Trump win would really present challenges in 2 ways, bilaterally and multilaterally. Bilaterally, we do pretty well. There was concerns, of course, under the first Trump administration that Australia might be hurt by his tariffs and some of those mercantilist policies that he put into place in America, but we were given special treatment. So we were given exemptions from the steel tariffs and the aluminium tariffs, which really helped us. That special relationship between Australia and the US alliance has been forged over a century on the battlefield, but also as close friends and allies in the Pacific, it really means something, and it means something to Trump as well. You might remember early in the Trump administration, Malcolm Turnbull went over to Washington and President Trump agreed to honour the refugee deal that was struck under the Obama administration, which wasn't much of a deal for the US and was very good for Australia, very preferential to us. But he honoured that in the spirit of the bilateral relationship. And I think he would do that too with AUKUS. So I think bilaterally, there'll be concerns and people will be worried, but if the first Trump administration is a guide, we'll do pretty well. And that always seems to be the case, irrespective of who inhabits the White House in Washington. Multilaterally, it's a different story. If Donald Trump does follow through with these threats, particularly with the tariffs and he embarks on another major trade war, that will affect us because it'll affect international economies. It'll affect our major trading partner, China, and its ability to buy our coal and iron ore and LNG and the rest of it and all our other goods. So that will have a material impact on us. His foreign policy will have an impact on us. Does he take a hard line if he wins tonight against NATO? Does he demand those NATO countries start paying their way? Does he allow Russia to have an upper hand in the war with Ukraine and push for Ukraine to cede land? What does he do in the Middle East? All these uncertainties will cause big trouble in the international community, in the global economy, and have impacts on us. So bilaterally, I think we'll do all right, whatever the outcome. Multilaterally, it's a different story, guys.
Yeah, Mark, just a brief one though. Just on domestic policies. Both sides will be looking at the election issues that have worked or not worked with either Harris or Trump. Trump has gone hard on immigration, hard on the economy. I guess Kamala Harris has asked for, a goodwill and hope and a future and more ideological positions. There's some similarities there between the way Anthony Albanese has been running a government and the way Peter Dutton's been running issues as opposition leader. What do you make of what they'll be watching and taking away from this?
Yeah, sure. The issues, I think they're universal issues at the moment, Michael, for incumbents. Of course, there are profound differences domestically between our electoral system here and the electoral system in the US and particularly our politics. But generally, in the broad, yes, the two issues are pretty obvious. It's cost of living first, and there are then national security issues, which at the moment run into those areas of immigration. It's not as sharp in Australia at the moment as it is, or serrated, you might say, as it is in the US and the way that Donald Trump has prosecuted this campaign. But there are still issues about the border. There are still issues about the number of migrants coming into Australia and the impact that's having on the housing and on our economy. So those issues will play, and I think they'll be taking some leads, although they'll be applied in a different way in the Australian political existence.
All right, Mark Riley, thanks for that. Those 5,500 monitors, they're all tuned to Channel 7, aren't they? So if they're not, can you run around the whole
thing? Go around now and personally change them all.
Busy, are you, Ross?
I have a master remote, and those that aren't on, they'll turn off.
Go and if the Prime Minister wants to come on, or Peter Dutton, he's more than welcome to pop in the studio too. So go and offer the invitation.
He's got this little thing called question time in about 5 minutes, mate. But that aside, he would be here.
Right. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Ross.
All right, you're live with 7 special coverage of the US election. Next, we'll be joined by political commentator Tara Setmayer, once a Republican, now a Democrat, for her reaction.
Plus, it's coming up to 2 p.m. daylight saving time. Polls are closing in 4 states, including the battleground of Nevada.
Really good to have your company. You're live with 7's rolling coverage of the US election. It's 2 p.m. daylight saving time. That's 10 p.m. in Washington, D.C. Live shot there inside Mar-a-Lago, I'm pretty sure, Donald Trump's headquarters. The polls have just closed in 4 states, including, as we've been discussing, the battleground of Nevada.
OK, let's go straight to foreign editor Hugh Whitfield at our data wall. Hugh, you've got all the latest information. What's the state of play at the moment?
Look, at the moment, we have Donald Trump on 162, but I reckon that's going to become 172 very shortly, and Kamala Harris on 81. We just projected that Trump will win the state of Louisiana, 8 electoral college votes. He has picked up 66% of the vote now. In terms of the 7 key swing states, there we go. We've just had another update. Montana and Utah slipping into Donald Trump's column. So, as I say, he's up to 172. Completely expected those polls just closing there in Montana and Utah. In terms of the 7 key swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. At the moment, in Michigan, Harris is ahead. At the moment in Wisconsin, Harris is ahead. In Pennsylvania, Harris is ahead. With those three states, Kamala Harris hits 270. She wins the presidency, but by the smallest amount possible, bang on 270. It would mean that if Donald Trump won North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona and Nevada, he falls 2 electoral college votes short. North Carolina, Trump is ahead. Georgia, Trump is ahead. Guys.
So what that's based on, though, is if those three states there, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Harris gets, and every other state stay as projected for either candidate.
Absolutely. So we're expecting that Harris will pick up Washington State over on the West Coast, Oregon and California. California, the most valuable of all the states in the country. And if she also picks up Hawaii, as expected, and Virginia, and New Hampshire, and Connecticut, and New Jersey, then if she restores that blue wall that Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, that Joe Biden reclaimed back, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that's 270, that's the White House.
So Hugh, sorry, to drill down just a bit further, because those three states are really important. You said she's ahead, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Do we know how much of the vote has been counted, and do we know how long we can expect before we get more solid results out of those states?
Sure, it's really tight. It's really tight. Michigan, we've got 14% of the vote counted, 53% Harris, 45% Trump. Wisconsin, 20% of the vote counted, 51% Harris, 47% Trump. Pennsylvania, 32% of the vote counted, 52 Harris, 47 Trump. So, over the course of the next couple of hours, as more of the vote comes in, as more of those mail-in ballots are opened, we will get a better idea. Is it going to stay as tight as it is, or is one candidate going to leap ahead? And then we can start to make some maybe semi-projections about where those three states fall.
I tell you what, if you believe the New York Times needle, as we've been discussing, Hugh, it shifted again. I mean, they've now got a 72% chance of a Trump victory, leaning toward Trump, him getting 287 seats. Harris on 251, as we've said. They've been wildly ahead of all of the projections that we can find so far. Worth showing you, in contrast to the data we're getting and all the other networks are getting across the United States as well. So there you go. Let's just do a quick check-in, because all of our correspondents have been pretty busy for weeks, even months now, across the United States. They're in the key areas. Let's go first to US Bureau Chief David Woiwod with the Harris camp at Howard University in DC. David, what do you reckon?
Well, guys, there's a real cautiousness in the air here in the quad at Howard University, I can tell you that much. Certainly the band and the music that had been playing just a few moments ago has now gone down, and the direct feed of CNN is now being blasted into the eyeballs of thousands and thousands of very anxious, very, very anxious, it has to be said, Democrats that have joined this party here this evening. Certainly they were hoping for a much more lively atmosphere tonight, but as that pathway and that New York Times projection started gaining some traction throughout the crowd here, I can tell you that there was a real sense of urgency now with this night, and a lot of worry going on here at Howard University.
I've got a bit of PTSD triggering me here, Woiwod, because I was obviously in Hillary Clinton's campaign back in 2016, feeling the same thing. Everyone was very buoyant at the beginning, and then slowly people got quieter and then very dejected. I'm wondering, I know you're up on a riser. It's difficult when you're talking to us to get into the people, but have you had a chance to talk to supporters there about this New York Times needle? Because if you look at that map that Hugh's been showing us, there's not too much cause for concern, but that New York Times needle is really worrying for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, it really is, Ange, but just going back to that 2016 issue, that is still very fresh in the minds of not only yourself, but a number of those supporters here. It may have been 8 years ago, but that was a huge moment for Democrats, of course. They had planned that massive party under the symbolism of that glass ceiling, as you well know, and it just didn't eventuate. That is still a very, very salient point for these Democrats. But yeah, we have spoken to a number of them, and we know that that pathway, it could be narrowing at this stage, and they have all been looking at that New York Times projection, and it's certainly weighing very heavily on this crowd. It had been a party atmosphere, but there it is there, those numbers leaning towards Donald Trump, that 73% chance of victory. They're certainly not the numbers that these supporters here had wanted to see so early in the night.
All right, David, thank you so much for that. Let's go to our other correspondent, Tim Lester, who's at the Mar-a-Lago complex where Donald Trump is. We know that for a fact. We heard earlier. We also know it's where Gina Reinhart is tonight. Tim.
Hello, Michael. Hello, Ange. A fascinating battle unravelling here, and waiting to know what decision Donald Trump makes in terms of whether he appears tonight or not. Of course, famously 4 years ago, we had that appearance in the early hours of the morning. Was it after 2 a.m., as I recall? Will we see a repeat of that tonight? Probably not. The Trump camp, the news we're getting, or the sense we're getting, is that they're making a very deliberate decision about whether they bring out the former president tonight, and that depends on when he can be confident. Now, they can be pretty happy with the numbers so far, particularly perhaps that they might upset things in Virginia, that the indications from Georgia and North Carolina are pretty good. The dent that the Harris camp thought they might make in either of those states, at least for now, hasn't come to pass, as tight as they are. So far, things looking pretty good, and of course the New York Times needle for Donald Trump, but it's not enough to close the deal by any stretch. So you'd think for now Donald Trump wouldn't want to be making the journey to the complex behind me, the convention centre, where he's bringing Republicans in. If he gets enough evidence tonight, we'd expect to see him here. If not, the celebrations for the Republicans could wait a while yet, guys.
OK, Tim Lester in Florida for us, thank you. One state which will no doubt have a big say on the result, as we've been saying all day, Pennsylvania, and officials in Philadelphia have been quick to stamp out claims of cheating.
Voting in Philly, we're voting our conscience, we're voting for whoever is our favorite candidate, and if you don't like that, F around and find out.
Didn't mince his words. Miley Hogan is in Philadelphia. Miley, you've been speaking with Trump supporters. They are pretty full of confidence.
Yeah, and they are. We're in the suburbs just outside of Philadelphia, and I'll show you this room. A lot of these Trump supporters now have taken their seats and are glued to the big screen as they watch these results roll in. These people here in this room are the rusted-on Trump supporters. You can see that they've come in here with all of their outfits. They're wearing the MAGA hats. These are the people that have been out volunteering. A lot of them have also contributed to the Donald Trump campaign as well. You can see how enthusiastic they are about their candidate of choice. To understand it better, let's hear from them.
The American values, I think. He just represents me better than the other team.
What are those values?
What are the values? Let's go to Sandra Smith and look at how that is playing out. I just like the way he ran the country before.
He's American. He's what people like about America, and he's just pro-America.
I think there's a lot of people here that in Pennsylvania that are for Trump that are kind of like the silent majority.
So this county was actually won by Joe Biden. The Democrats are trying to hold on to it. The Republicans are hoping that they can flip it. They're going to be sitting here for the evening. Lots of them are saying that they're going to stick it out until till the very wee hours of the morning, until they know what's going on, and we'll be here with them to see how they're coping as those results come in.
OK, Miley Hogan, thanks so much. We'll check in back with you shortly. Let's go now to Natalie Barr in Washington, D.C., who's with former White House spokesman Pete Seat.
Yes, we have some information on the needle. The New York Times needle that is being quoted worldwide right now. The Nightly has actually just reported that this is the same tracker that reportedly gave Hillary Clinton a 95% chance of winning. As you can see, at the moment, it's giving Donald Trump quite a significant chance of winning, 75% chance of winning. Pete Seat, you have some information on
Well, just a couple of hours ago, Nate Cohn, who runs the needle for the New York Times, said that there might not be a needle this year, at least publicly, because there's a strike with tech employees, individuals who run tech applications that work at the New York Times, and he didn't think it would get up and running in time. But I'm also going to read this. This is from Vox. They did a story on the needle not long ago. Quote, "The Times has continued to tweak its model and display for the needle over the past 2 years and to explain repeatedly how exactly the needle works and why you shouldn't develop too much of an attachment to its predictions." So the guys who run it are even saying, don't put too much stock into this.
Don't do your noodle on the needle. I mean, we shouldn't be putting too much stock on the needle. Guys, I think this is breaking news.
That is breaking news.
Peter's just broken it.
No, that is the line of the day. I'm already calling it. Don't do your noodle on the needle.
Yeah. Okay. I like it a lot. Good on you. Thanks, Nat.
Thank you, Nat. Now, we are joined by political commentator Tara Setmeyer. Tara, Trump is winning more support from African American men. This is unusual. Why?
Well, I think that the Trump administration, when they were in office, recognized that there was an avenue here to try to peel off some black votes, which is why they passed criminal justice reform. They did investments into historically black colleges. And also during the pandemic, during COVID, the stimulus checks, Donald Trump made a point to make sure his signature was on there. So people thought that it was Donald Trump responsible for the stimulus checks to help with COVID when it was actually Congress. So a lot of these things have opened up the door to speak to disenfranchised black voters who've been tired of the Democratic Party in their minds taking them for granted. And also, there is some misogyny in black culture too that they are leaning into with black male voters, particularly younger ones, to try to peel off some of those votes as part of the larger kind of bro strategy that the Trump campaign has been using this time around. But we still have a lot of votes to go, especially in the urban centers. So I'm not so sure we're going to see a significant amount of peel off this time just yet. We just don't know yet.
I just want to get your take on a theory that David Woywood mentioned that we've also heard and read, that perhaps young black men are identifying with Trump because of his legal issues. And he comes out saying he's a victim of a legal system that's persecuting him unfairly, and that black American men do face that. We've heard that in the Black Lives Matters. Do you think that's real? Is there any foundation in that?
I find that to be a bit specious because, yes, it's true that there is a lot of dissatisfaction with the justice system and the inequities that exist here, particularly with black men. But Donald Trump being a victim of the system is so outrageous. He is a white privileged billionaire who has a history of racial discrimination throughout his entire career, from being sued by the Justice Department for not renting to black families to the Central Park Five and calling for the innocent men who were eventually exonerated to have the death penalty, to disparaging comments he's made. I mean, his history of disparaging people of color is pretty extensive. So I don't know that they necessarily make that association as far as the justice system being unfair to Donald Trump compared to the long injustices that the system has with black men. I don't think that argument is the strongest one of it. I think it has to do with economics and other issues, not that one.
Yeah.
So super quickly, your take on what we're seeing so far, the numbers, the New York Times needle.
Yeah, well, I'm glad someone brought up the New York Times needle because I was going to. It was very wrong in the past, and the metrics that go into how they make those determinations are under a lot of scrutiny. The betting markets, they're more like betting markets, and there's a lot of tech bros that are putting their thumb on the scale there with that. So we need to take the New York Times needle with a grain of salt. We still have a lot of votes to count, is my point. And we always knew it was going to be razor thin. The organization I run, the Seneca Project, we focus on women voters, but we also saw from last time that this was probably going to come down to about 100 to 150,000 votes in 4 key states. And it looks like that is the exact same pathway that we're heading down now in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and then we'll see what's going to happen in Georgia and Arizona and North Carolina and Nevada. So those are really the big states. The blue wall, though, that is what's going to matter. And all Kamala Harris needs is 50+1 in those states to win those electoral votes. But it's going to be razor thin. And last time around, It took us a couple days to find out, and we may be in the same position again.
I think we're in exactly the same position. It was the case going into this count at the start of the day. And if you're looking at those key states, it's exactly what it's showing now, that it's absolutely down to the wire, razor thin. Tara, great to have you with us. Thank you. We're still ahead on our special coverage of the US election. Former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer will join us for a quick chat shortly. The impact on the globe.
The numbers are coming in thick and fast. Hugh Whitfield will unpack all the data live right here after this break.
Well, look at the smiles on the faces there. This is the Trump headquarters where they're getting ready. They all expect to hear from Donald Trump at some point in their evening. The scenes there in the last hour or so, we've been watching them. Our producers have been watching them. They've really taken off. Certainly a celebratory mood there. They are all the MAGA supporters there waiting for Donald Trump in Florida. But let's go back to Hugh at the data wall now. Hugh, let's do a recap here. We've got 45 of the states done, closed, 5 to go. Some important ones in there.
Yeah, that's right. So since we last spoke, some new projections, including Colorado, 10 electoral college votes for Kamala Harris, pushing the Democratic candidate to 91 votes. Donald Trump currently on 178, boosted ahead by Mississippi, 6 electoral college votes. Now, there, Trump took 62% of the vote up against Harris's 36%, and in Colorado, 55% for Harris, 43% for Trump. Now, in these 3 key swing states around the Great Lakes, the latest counts have Wisconsin, 36% of the vote now in, and the gap is 49% of the vote in. The gap is tightening, 49% for Harris, 48% for Trump, 49.4, 48.9, 0.5% between the two candidates. In Michigan, we've got 17% of the vote counted now, 51% for Harris, 47% for Trump. The gap between the two candidates in these 2 key swing states is tightening, guys.
Yeah, just a whisker. And that figure that we heard before, just 100,000 or 150,000 votes will dictate the winner. Just incredible. Yeah. Let's bring in Keith Suter again. Keith, what are you making of where we're at the moment? What states are going?
Yes, what is interesting is that you've got a total of 240 million Americans who are eligible to vote. So when you're looking at what Hugh's figures are just a few thousand one way or the other, it just shows how close it is going to be. Ideally, what we would like to have had tonight is a victory for one side or the other, which would be not disputed. In other words, it would be so large. But I fear it's going to be so close that whoever loses will be mounting legal challenges.
So, Keith, interestingly, those numbers that Hugh's quoting in those states, they are total numbers too, which includes the mail-in vote. So the mail-in isn't some separate mystery figure that's going to arrive way after this evening their time. It's included, and it's as close as at least 2 or 3 of the reliable polls were suggesting going into this day.
And of course, the pollsters refused to make any predictions. The only person who did make a prediction was Professor Alan Lichtman, who for 40 years has ignored the polls and this time round has predicted a Kamala Harris victory, and he still stands by that. Even though he's subject to death threats from supporters from one of the candidates, he is continuing to affirm that position.
He's got 9 of the 10 right, hasn't he?
Well, he's pretty got all of them right. Yeah. The year 2000, a bit of a question mark because it was decided by the Supreme Court.
He still thinks he got that one right.
But he got that one right, really.
And Keith, the importance of whether we get a result tonight, it's not just like, oh gosh, we have to sit up for hours to find out who's the president, but it really is more of a security concern, isn't it? Because officials over there, the polls have all been like swarming with police and security, but also they're not so much concerned about violence today. They're more concerned about violence spilling into tomorrow if there's no decision.
Absolutely, and we've seen that 4 years ago when people then stormed the voting places. It's interesting, some of the voting places are almost being treated like a bank with all the amount of fencing that's gone around it, the security guards that are on duty. It's a very different situation from which we had 4 years ago. The authorities have learned from their errors 4 years ago and have certainly treating it as a high security event.
Hugh, Keith, actually Hugh might have a say on this as well, but Keith, let me ask you, earlier in our coverage you talked about this interesting thing of the red mirage.
Yeah.
And if you look at Hugh's map right now, is that a mirage or is that a real thing right now?
No, that's exactly what you get every 4 years. So the Republican votes tend to be counted first because they're coming in from smaller rural communities. And then the big cities on either side, so there's California and the East Coast, they tend to come in and suddenly the blue wave takes effect. Now, 4 years ago, Donald Trump gave everybody an early mark by going for the red mirage and saying, it's all over, folks, I've won. This time round, he's not going to try to pull that stunt again, and he's going to have to wait for the full results to come in. But it could well be, as I've warned, that we'll end up with so many legal challenges we could go through until January.
All right, we're about 35 minutes away from perhaps the blue wave hitting us then, Keith, if that's the case. Those West Coast states starting to close. All right, thank you.
OK, as we know, votes are being counted right across America. This now is a live shot in Atlanta where ballots are being processed. They're taking their time with that, quite slowly there. Pretty relaxed. We are back with an update of the results after this.
Certainly, as America decides, a live shot there of Denver, Colorado, where that state has gone blue for Kamala Harris at this stage. But they've still got to count every single vote because, as we're hearing in our coverage, Angela Cox, it is coming down to the wire.
Absolutely. Let's go back now to Natalie Barr in Washington, D.C., who's with former White House spokesman Pete Seat. Nat, a bit more blue on the map now.
Yes, exactly, and that'll happen, as we've heard, as the states close in California. Those big states probably turn blue, unless there's a big headline. Pete, talk us through how the states count, because they don't have an Australian Electoral Commission type body. Each state does its own thing with very different rules, don't they?
Yeah, we embrace states' rights in the United States of America, and maybe to a fault when it comes to elections. I can walk you through, in the state of Indiana, where I live, counties use different voting machines. There is a list of approved vendors that is approved at the state level, and as long as you use one of those vendors for your machines, that's okay. So if you live in one county, one election, move to the county next door in the next election, you might use a completely different machine to vote on.
Okay.
When it comes to voting, there are some counties that will do a central count. So all the various precincts and the polling locations will take their ballots to that central spot for counting. In other counties, they'll do it at the various polling locations and then call in the results.
So when Trump talks a lot about cheating and about things going wrong in different counties, in different boxes, has he got a point? Is there stuff going wrong here? Because it sounds like it's a bit of a dog's breakfast.
Electoral fraud is not widespread, as Donald Trump claims, nor is it non-existent, the way Democrats claim. The truth is in the middle. There's some that happens, but if it affects the results of an election, it's a very, very, very small handful of votes that would do that, not massive thousands and thousands of votes.
Because we've got, 10, 20,000 people deciding, states. So could there have been that many that go wrong?
I find it hard to believe, and I know some of my Republican friends don't like that, but think of the coordination involved in the planning, the meticulous planning that it would take to pull something like that off, and for no one to ever find out, to uncover what happened and the truth behind it. It just seems so implausible.
Okay, so when do you think we'll start seeing more of the blue states called?
Well, it depends on when they close the polls, right? Especially on the West Coast. We, unfortunately, here on the East Coast of the United States have to wait until they close over there and then start to report their results. But with a state like California, after they close, it's not going to take long. It's a foregone conclusion which direction that state's going to go.
So are you feeling, when we talk about those Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and I know it's only been a small number of votes counted, and you see that Kamala Harris is sort of ahead by a tiny amount in those states, how does that make you see it?
Well, that it could be a long night, because you'll probably see the ping pong of Kamala Harris up, Donald Trump up, and vice versa. It just depends on where the votes are coming from. As was mentioned, those rural counties are likely going to be Trump votes, and those cities, the Pittsburgh, the Philadelphia, the Milwaukee, the Madison, the Detroit, they tend to take longer because there's more votes to count. And so they tend to be on the back end, which is why you may see Trump leading and then out of nowhere Kamala Harris overtaking him with the lead.
That's what we saw last time. He would say there's been a dump and they're cheating. Look, suddenly the Democrats are ahead.
Yeah, and the dump typically is cities that like to count everything before they report it.
Okay, thank you very much, Pete Seek. We'll go back to you in the studio.
Okay, thanks so much, Nat. We want to have a listen now. The Prime Minister has been speaking about the US election race in question time. Let's have a listen.
And of course, the election of a new President of the United States is always a moment of profound consequence for the world, for our region and for Australia. Our government will seek and build a strong partnership with whoever the American people choose as their next president. The alliance between Australia and the United States has always been bigger than individuals. It has stood tall through generations of governments from both sides of the aisle. Of course, as leader of the Labor Party, I'm proud that it was John Curtin who looked to America in Australia's darkest hours during World War II. And since that occurred, the US alliance has grown and it's prospered under Labor and Liberal governments, under Democrat and Republican administrations. Over many decades and throughout many global challenges, we've always sought to work together to advance our shared interests, and I have every confidence that we'll continue to do so. I do want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to my friend, President Joe Biden. Within 48 hours of being sworn in as PM, I was meeting with President Biden at the Quad meeting in Tokyo. It was a whirlwind, but I'll never forget the genuine warmth of Joe's welcome. We've worked together very closely to make Australia's alliance with the United States stronger than it has ever been. Working together not just in AUKUS and defence issues, but also on taking action against climate change, also on areas such as critical minerals as well. I look forward to deepening that cooperation even further at APEC and the G20, which will commence next week and then the week after. We have made great progress on trade and on technology, on climate, on all of these issues, working together with our friends in the region as well to promote stability, security and prosperity.
There's Anthony Albanese. As we heard earlier from our political editor, Mark Riley, every television set in Parliament House is on the US election, very important for our country. Yeah. Social media has changed the game in this election, with both Trump and Harris battling it out to be president of the platforms. As America waits, Sally Barry is tracking social media trends. Sal, what's dominating the internet right now?
Yeah, well, as predicted and feared as well, the hashtag fraud is starting to trend on X at the moment. It isn't a surprise, of course, given the seeds that have been sown by Donald Trump into the lead up to this. Videos have been circulating on social media claiming voter fraud in Philadelphia, and Trump has posted on his very own Truth Social in the past couple of hours claiming massive cheating there. Now, of course, misinformation is a huge issue this election, and social media giants like Meta and YouTube say they have spent millions on preemptive steps to try and curb its impact. That includes labelling AI content to stop the spread of fake videos, but it is an internet game of whack-a-mole due to that sheer volume of stuff that is being generated online. Just to put it in context, social media creates over 3 billion images and 700,000 hours of video a day. So it is a very hard thing for those social media platforms to be totally across and prevent, guys.
It is, Sal. Wasn't this a weird factor in the last couple of days too? A squirrel, believe it or not, called Peanut, has swamped the internet. It's actually a really sad story behind it all. A dead squirrel became a political issue. What's it all about?
Well, Michael, in case for people that didn't know about this, Peanut the squirrel is a star of the internet, or was a star, unfortunately. The 7-year-old rescue critter who naturally has a massive following online, of course, as you often see with these sort of things on the internet. But it was recently seized and put down by authorities in the US, and that was due to health and safety fears. This, of course, sparked outrage right across the internet. And then we saw a really interesting turn of events, and maybe one many of us didn't see coming, because Trump's running mate, JD Vance, actually used it this week during rallies to pit voters against the Democrats. Hear how he spun it.
So I know Don's fired up about Peanut the squirrel. We were on the way down here from Cincinnati. He was like, is it really the case that the Democrats murdered the Elon Musk of squirrels? And I said, yeah, it sounds like. Have you seen the videos of this squirrel? He's a genius.
Justice for Peanut is now trending, actually, with MAGA Republicans. A lot of them are posting pictures online and videos like this one with banners flying. It's on the front of that ute, actually, in its honour. So it is actually gaining momentum in its own small space on the internet. Of course, it only takes for a moment for something to turn into an unstoppable meme in the election. Just ask the poor cats and dogs of Springfield, Ohio. And of course, that one comment from Donald Trump during the debate based on fake social media posts, that has really been a standout. In case you missed it, I don't know how you could have, but let's have a look at that.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
And that, of course, turned into a song, could be the soundtrack of the year. But, of course, guys, the race to the White House, it's given us plenty of viral moments. Whatever the outcome of what happens, we can sure count on plenty more to come.
Indeed. All right, Sal, we'd like to say only in America, but we've got our own federal election coming up early next year. It will be influenced online. There's no doubt about it. Thanks, Sal.
Thanks, Sal.
Hugh, let's go to you. There's some interesting movements going on. Virginia?
Yeah, look, I'm going to come to Virginia in a moment, Michael and Ange, but we've just had two new projections, Kansas and Iowa. Despite that rogue poll, it's now clearly a rogue poll that had Iowa possibly going to Kamala Harris a few days ago. Both Kansas and Iowa going for Donald Trump. 55% of the vote in Kansas for the Republican candidate. Now, Virginia, you can see that most of these states on the east coast of America, apart from places like New Hampshire, Connecticut and New Jersey, they are likely going to go for Kamala Harris. Virginia is fascinating. I would have thought that we would have been able to call or make a projection on Virginia by now, but it is much, much tighter than anyone will have expected. Right now in Virginia, we've got about 74% of the vote counted. Kamala Harris is on 49.7 and Trump is not very far behind, less than 2% between the two candidates. Now, the polls had Harris winning Virginia by 6%. It is so much tighter than those polls predicted. Now, the thing is that it will likely go to Kamala Harris because Trump's vote has kind of stagnated because the vote has finished in much of the smaller, less populated counties in the western part of Virginia, and it is continuing in the Harris favouring cities in Arlington and Richmond and Norfolk as well, particularly these suburbs that are on the western side of the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., which of course is Democratic heartland. So Virginia, very, very tight. We're not projecting it just yet. Harris in a real fight there.
Hugh, if it is coming down as close as this, as some of the polls did suggest going into it, your counting there is certainly showing it is right on the wire. Particularly Virginia, that's going to be an interesting state to keep looking at if it's that close.
I think what we're seeing is that in a lot of places, particularly in the northeast here, Kamala Harris is underperforming compared to Joe Biden. And it's particularly apparent in places like New Hampshire. We haven't called or made a projection on New Hampshire yet. New Hampshire, classically and traditionally a very independent state. They actually don't like either party. They don't get much of a choice, though. Usually they're going to end up with the Democrats, but very, very tight, and Harris underperforming in a lot of these places that are traditionally Democrat voting.
So interestingly, and we'll do this very briefly because we don't get stuck in the weeds here, but over the past few years, after Trump suffered the last loss, the MAGA groups have been stacking, if you like, some of the scrutiny process behind the scenes. The people who count. It used to be 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans in every area. But the MAGA people have gone in and taken a fair few of those positions for this very moment. If something like Virginia comes down to just a handful of votes, what does that mean?
Yeah, look, keep in mind, this is the third election that Donald Trump has fought in a row. First time round in 2016, he was almost surprised himself that he won. He barely had a ground operation anywhere in the United States. In 2020, it all came down to those disputes about counting and whether certain votes would count in particular parts of the country. And this time round, in places like Michigan and Arizona, Donald Trump has worked very hard, and his MAGA operation have worked very hard to get MAGA people onto local, state and county authorities that are in charge of counting these votes. They say to prevent electoral fraud. Now, of course, pretty much all of the accusations about electoral fraud that were levelled by Donald Trump last time round didn't come to pass, but he is pulling out all stops to try and to prevent that happening this time.
All right, thank you very much. Let's just take a quick break here. Live next on our special coverage here on 7, former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer is ready to go. We'll get his thoughts on all of this.
Votes are being counted across America, including here in Chester County, Pennsylvania. You'll see the results live here on 7.
For watching America Decide, let's go to some breaking news. And Elon Musk, a Trump supporter, has effectively called the election. Live to our correspondent Tim Lester at Palm Beach in Florida, Trump headquarters. Tim, what has Elon said?
Well, the master of X, the former Twitter site, is saying game, set and match in a tweet. There's no doubt what he'd be tweeting about tonight. He has been 100% in behind Donald Trump, and also, as the world's richest man, a critical financial element of Trump's campaign. Elon Musk has put everything into Donald Trump winning, now tweeting game, set and match. Now, he's doing that before any of the authorities in this have declared the election, obviously. Early signs are certainly good for Donald Trump, but we haven't had a declaration of any win. One other rumour kicking around here is that we'll see Donald Trump any time in the conference centre behind me to address Republicans and to claim the election. Now, that's very interesting because one of the Democrats' complaint about this is the possibility that Donald Trump might come in early and claim before he's really entitled to claim it, and either he then goes on to win or he's able to claim cheating more plausibly to his supporters down the track. So there you go. Donald Trump has spoken about this earlier.
All right, Tim, thank you. Let's jump straight to an interview now with former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer, joining us live from Adelaide. Alexander, good to have your company here on our 7 News coverage. Obviously, some twists and turns underway right now. A lot of red for Donald Trump, but we still haven't seen some of the big blue states coming in. What's your read on the vote and the count there right now?
Well, I think it's the same. I mean, the tide seems to be favouring Trump, but there's a long way to go yet. There are postal votes to count, of course, and there is a huge number of votes still outstanding in the swing states. So it's very hard to be sure at this stage, but I'd rather be in Trump's camp than Harris's camp. It's certainly trending towards Trump.
Alexander Downer, you're obviously a former foreign minister. How do you see Australia's relationship with America under Donald Trump once again? Do you see any changes? Are there any reasons to be concerned with the AUKUS deal and the like?
No, I don't think so. I think either way, whoever wins the election, Australia will be in very good stead with the Americans, with the administration, whether it be a Harris administration or a Trump administration. I mean, there's been extraordinarily exaggerated rhetoric by both sides during this election campaign. In the case of Trump, him being called a fascist and a Nazi, and he would abandon America's allies and so on. Well, he was the president before for 4 years, and that didn't happen then. And I know from my discussions with Republicans while I've recently been in America, they're all very confident that the relationship with Australia will remain strong. I know the media will focus a bit on things that Prime Minister Albanese or Ambassador Kevin Rudd have said about Donald Trump in the past, and that's fair enough, but I don't think any of that should be held to account. If Trump does win, I think we should just move on from those remarks.
What's your final prediction there, Alexander, then, looking at the vote right now?
I have always thought that Trump would win this election, whatever the polls had said, because I thought he was not. It's not a question of personal preference here, by the way. I'm a bit neutral about that. But I have always thought he came across as the stronger candidate. He was a known quantity. Kamala Harris, relatively unknown. And I think, well, I've been in America for quite a lot of the campaign. She comes across in her interviews as very weak and uncertain, whereas he's a bit unhinged, that's true, but he certainly comes across as opinionated and certain of his ground. And I think in the end, I've always thought people were more likely to vote for that, particularly undecided people.
Do you think her gender had anything to do with it? Is America sexist? Are they likely to put another woman up as a candidate for president?
I doubt that. It's hard to prove that, isn't it? I doubt that that's the case. Men seem to have flocked to somewhat by the abortion issue. I think that has cut through quite strongly with women voters in the United States. I'm not sure that I could, when I've been in America, I've had a sense that there was a problem with her being a woman. I mean, a lot of countries elect women to be their leaders, and some of those women are brilliant leaders, by the way, like Margaret Thatcher and Giorgia Meloni in Italy. So I think the public are probably pretty neutral about the gender.
Yeah. All right, Alexander, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Very briefly, it was interesting speaking to Joe Hockey, Alexander's former colleague, for our Spotlight special. He put it down to a question of authenticity.
Yeah.
Who's the most authentic politician? Whether you like Trump's personality or not, he's authentic. There's a perception in the polling in America that Kamala wasn't.
Yeah,
and that plays everything.
Like I said earlier, her camp, there was concern about that, and it was put to her, like, you're just not authentic enough. And she said, no, I'm just disciplined. But voters don't agree.
We'll see. The count is in. We'll know soon. Let's go to Nat Barr in Washington, D.C. again with former White House spokesman Pete Seat. Nat, take it away.
Thank you. Yes, as we talk about these states that are being called, Virginia, very close, normally a Democrat seat, but what are your views on that?
Well, it is incredibly close right now. And what's so interesting about Virginia is the polling was not close, right? Kamala Harris was leading by 6, 7, 8 points. But Donald Trump went there on Saturday. He held a rally, not a battleground state, but he went to Virginia to hold a rally. So it makes you wonder if they saw something in their internal polling that led them in that direction. But I would point out, I'm getting this from my friends in Virginia, we could throw a rock and hit them, they're that close. But the most populous counties have not yet fully reported their results.
Okay.
So that margin for Kamala Harris could widen. You would think it would widen here in the coming minutes.
Okay, so that's interesting. So his strategist must have seen a potential there for him to go.
Yeah, and he went to New Mexico as well. Obviously, he could talk about the immigration issue and the border there. He went to Coachella, California. He's not going to win California, but he still went there. The interesting thing, and the Trump campaign has said this, and it's true, the media follows him wherever he goes. Same for Kamala Harris. It doesn't matter. He's still running for president of the United States. But when it comes to that Coachella trip, the part that I think people missed is that was a volunteer recruitment event, right? To get people to come to that rally and then get them to go across the border to Arizona, which is a battleground state.
Okay, yeah, so there was something else behind it. What about Nevada? Our leading pollster, we're hearing, is predicting a Harris win for Nevada.
And that would not be entirely surprising. I know it's a battleground state, but Democrats typically win the state of Nevada. The only Republicans who have won it since 1988, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush in 2000 and 2004.
Okay, so it's a quasi-battleground state.
That's right.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. Back to you guys.
All right, Nat, Pete, thank you very much. Coming up on this 7 News special, America Decides. We're live to our correspondents across the US.
It's coming up to 3 p.m. daylight saving time, and polls are closing shortly in 3 states.
Sorry, Sarah. Gee, this election is shifting over the last hour or so. There's some really interesting data coming through pointing towards a Donald Trump victory for president. Some of those blue states, though, are about to close, in fact, on this minute right now. We'll go to the Hugh Whitfield in just a minute. 3 p.m. Daylight savings time, 11 p.m. in Washington, D.C. The polls have just closed in the states of California, Oregon and Washington.
Okay, so right now we're going to go to David Woywood, who is in Washington, D.C. with Harris headquarters. David, what is the mood like there?
Guys, a real deep sense of cautiousness here at Howard University, and now that mood has really changed in the past half hour as the tens of thousands of Harris supporters have been watching those results come through. In fact, another projection is just about to come through, and we'll know in a second as well. California, so well expected there. Big roar has gone from the crowd here. That is not the one of the states, though, that the Democrats had been sweating on. Look, we've spoken to a number of these supporters here. They are deeply nervous at this stage, but they are holding out that slither of hope right now.
Well, we have a long night to go. There are a lot of votes left to count, and we still have a lot of states left to declare.
I'm a little nervous, but I feel like Kamala can pull through. You know, it's very early in the night.
It's still up and up. We still have time. We still have hope. I believe that we're going to come through. If we get California, that would be a big thing.
Yeah, they still have that hope, and it is a powerful thing. We are expecting something to happen on the stage shortly. This crowd is just filling up here at Howard University as well, so perhaps a sign that the formal celebrations will get underway in a short time, guys.
Okay, David Woywood, we will come back to you soon. Thank you. US correspondent Marley Hogan is in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, that all-important state. Marley, as we've said, it's one of the biggest battlegrounds of this election, and it would seem Donald Trump has now taken a narrow lead.
Yeah, and the latest CNN polling and the New York Times polling has Donald Trump ever so slightly in the lead in this crucial battleground state. I can tell you that the mood in this room here in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, there's now a sense of confidence in this room, and every time Pennsylvania comes up on that big screen, this crowd behind me gets up and cheers very loudly. There are chants, they are excited, they're feeling very confident about turning this state red. Now, the governor, Josh Shapiro, has addressed the media. He is asking for calm and patience as those ballots are counted. It's understood that bomb threats have actually been emailed into a number of polling places. The governor saying that none of those threats have been found credible. This is what he had to say.
I want to reassure Pennsylvania and all the folks across the country who are paying attention to our Commonwealth that every legal, eligible vote will be counted accurately, and that the will of the people will be respected.
Now, the counting is expected to extend past election night. Again, the governor asking for patience as those workers make their way through that ballot. But the people in this room, they're feeling confident. They're glued to that big screen. But these are the volunteers that have been knocking on the doors, trying to get the Republicans to come out and vote. Now, we'll move back here and try to grab some supporters, because you can see that they are watching this television screen. But we might just interrupt. Hello, how are you this evening?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm good. We just wanted to ask you, how are you feeling while you watch this screen and see the results come in?
Optimistic. I'm super optimistic. I have faith. I believe that our country sees that's what's been happening in the last 4 years, and that they want change, no matter if they're Democrat or Republican, liberal, whatever. The borders are wide open. We don't want that.
Have you been out door knocking or volunteering for this
campaign? I have been everywhere. I have actually met Donald Trump twice. I have a tattoo of Donald Trump on my leg. I'm a big fan. I love him dearly.
What is it about Donald Trump that you like so much?
I love that he loves America.
Do you ever get put off by some of the rhetoric?
Trump is Trump. Everyone has a thing about themselves. We're not perfect. None of us are. And he is who he is, but he takes care of business. And 4 years that he was president, we didn't have any wars. Every country was scared of us. That's what we need.
So you're feeling confident in this result tonight, not just for Pennsylvania, but nationally?
I believe that in the last 4 years, he prepared for everything. I believe that everything that's happening, if anything were to happen, he's ready for it.
There you go, guys. Thank you so much for your time. You can feel that confidence among these supporters. I mean, they are rusted on Trump supporters. She has him tattooed on her leg. So that is the kind of support that Donald Trump has among the people in this room.
Molly, I don't think we got a proper shot of that.
No,
Could we see the tattoo again? I mean, let's have a good look at it.
Get to see.
There we go. That's
Zoom in. Can you talk us through the tattoo?
That's a work of art.
So what happened was Jim Worthington, I love him. He's so awesome. He came into, I'm a server bartender. bartender. He came into my job and he said he had a gift for me to see Donald J. Trump, and that at that time Donald Trump was going through all the court things, and I got his tattoo. And the week that I saw him, I got to be with him on stage, which was phenomenal. He was a great guy. And then last week I was at actually Town Hall Center, and I was able to ask him a question, and the question was about server, bartender, no tax on tips.
So you asked him that question about tax on tips?
Yes, I sure did.
What did he say to you? What did you say to him?
There's going to be no tax on tips.
Do you think he'll live up to that?
I know he will. I know he will. I have so much faith in him. He's going to do great things for our country, and that's what we need.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Dedication right there. Miley, thank you very much for that.
Well, there we go.
In ink. We'll see if this result is in ink shortly. It's a lot of
I'm wondering how many Australians would have an elbow or Peter Dutton tattoo. There's an idea. Someone out there, surely.
None?
None, exactly.
Might be the answer.
Quite a good likeness, though.
All right, Donald Trump, as we're reporting right this hour, in fact, is having a steady lead over Kamala Harris. US correspondent Tim Lester's at Palm Beach County Convention Centre, Trump headquarters. And Tim, one of his biggest supporters has certainly called it.
Yes, Elon Musk, you could hardly get a more influential person to send out a message for you, particularly on Elon Musk's own social media platform X. The words of the world's wealthiest man on this election: game, set, match. And no one has any doubt who he's talking about. That is effectively from inside Camp Trump, coming from Elon Musk, a quite definitive claim. Also some excitement kind of kicking around here as to whether Donald Trump isn't about to turn up. We haven't seen any confirmation of that, certainly, though a lot of interest, and there'll be a lot of interest on the Democrat side, because in the lead up to the election day, many Democrats were discussing the possibility that one of the Trump tactics might be to claim the election early before even any of the networks, the established first to call elections in the United States, have made their calls, and perhaps then he can go either way, go on to win it or claim cheat down the track. So Democrats will be watching this very closely. No sign of Donald Trump yet, but a sign of confidence inside the Trump camp, with billionaire Elon Musk deciding this is a done game.
He's not alone there, Tim. Angela, you got a statement there from the New York Times.
Obviously, we've been looking at this New York Times needle, which was saying that the election was leaning towards Trump. A lot of people saying it's not always been accurate. You can see there now 88% chance of victory for Donald Trump. We've got a statement from the New York Times, because there are people who are saying this hasn't always been the most reliable needle. The statement says, for the first time tonight, we consider Trump likely to win the presidency. He has an advantage in each of Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin. To win, Harris would need to sweep all three. There is still a lot of vote left, but in the voting so far, Trump is narrowly but discernibly ahead.
Hugh, what do you make of that on the seats that you're watching right now on the wall and the data coming in?
Yeah, Michael, obviously that big projection that the Harris crowd in Washington saw 54 electoral college votes in California for Kamala Harris. That is with 0% of the vote counted in the Golden State. Of course, it is her home state, a Democratic governor, heavily Dem. That is no surprise whatsoever. Idaho, we are projecting for Donald Trump, 4 electoral college votes there. Now, in terms of our 7 key swing states, this is why the New York Times is so confident about their call, because of the 7 at the moment, Kamala Harris is only leading in Michigan with 52 against 46% of the vote for Donald Trump. In Wisconsin, Trump is ahead, 49.4 to 48.9, just 9,700 votes. In Pennsylvania, Trump is ahead, 51.2% to Harris, 47.8. In North Carolina, Trump is ahead, 50.8% to Harris, 47.8. In Georgia, Trump is ahead, 51% to 48. And in Arizona, it is so close. Trump is on 49.6%. Harris is on 49.5%. They each have about 900,000 votes. Trump on 904,000, Harris on 901,000. That is a difference of 2,247 votes. It could decide the election.
OK, Hugh, thank you. First, let's go now to NBC reporter Alice Barr inside the Palm Beach Convention Centre in Florida. Alice, enthusiasm in that building, I can assume, is building there. Any sign of Donald Trump?
You're assuming correctly about that. We have been hearing the cheers erupt every time there's one of these projections up on the big screens in here that goes in the red column for former President Trump. We have not yet heard when we may see and hear from him. At this point, we believe he's still at Mar-a-Lago, where he's been watching results come in with family and friends, that estate not far away from the Palm Beach County Convention Center where I am and where his supporters have been gathering. You can see that many of them are already up right in front of the stage. Many of them have been there for a long time. They've wanted a front row seat for whenever we do anticipate that we're going to hear from the former president. And yes, there's no question the energy here is high. The excitement has been building. We've also, NBC News has also been in contact with some Trump campaign officials who've said that the mood at Mar-a-Lago has shifted from cautious optimism to sort of outright optimism as they've seen more states called in their favor and seen some of the trends in a few of the key battleground states that we're watching. And one campaign advisor to NBC News really drilled down on the vote that they have picked up among Black and Latino voters, and they're calling that an historic expansion of the Republican Party, and something that, if it bears out, as we've noted, there's still quite a bit of vote out there, but if the trend lines continue as they are, and former President Trump does wind up winning another term, some of those demographic shifts are going to be really key to take a look at and to perhaps reimagine what many people have thought for a long time about some sort of basic tropes of the American electorate. So that is where things stand right now. We're still waiting for any guidance on the former president's movements, and with everyone else waiting to keep watching these results come in.
And
Angela and Michael, back to you.
What is the thought behind that increase in popularity with young men of Hispanic and African American background? Is it that they're more likely to be people living paycheck to paycheck and are really concerned about the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all knew from the very beginning that this election was going to come down to the economy, and there's been a lot of other things that have happened along the way. You know, reproductive rights has been a huge issue, and we've known that could potentially shift things. Immigration has always been big. The idea of threats to democracy, that's something that the Harris campaign really kind of split its focus on reproductive rights and on threats to democracy. So these issues have all come along, but the one that has never faded and that has essentially always been at the top has been the economy. And specifically with these young men, we've heard a lot from that group that these are people who have perhaps felt that they've lost out on opportunities, have felt like they want to be able to provide for a family, want to feel like they could buy a home, keep a steady job of the kind that maybe they felt like some of the previous generations had access to and that they have not felt that they could achieve themselves. And former President Trump has always been an excellent communicator, and he has really tapped into that angst among this group and fed into it in a lot of ways. Even though Vice President Harris tried to present her own options for how she was going to fix it, it seems like he was more effective in just tapping into it, and perhaps that is a difference maker at the end of the day.
All right, Alice, good analysis there, thank you. And right inside Trump headquarters, we might come back to you, thank you. Keith Sutter at the desk, foreign affairs expert. Keith, we're now getting much more clear votes.
Yep.
Except in a couple of states where it's absolute knife edge. You know, small fractions of percentages, the difference. With some solid counting underway, what are you reading?
Well, it does look as though it's going to be a Trump victory. And the Professor Alan Lichtman, whom I've been quoting for months, who's never got it right, never got it wrong in 40 years, clearly has got it wrong, because it's clearly sweeping towards Trump. May not be a huge victory. My guess is that the Democrat lawyers are going to have a bit of a field day. They're going to be challenging, I think, some of the votes. But it certainly has been interesting. Particularly one of the things that struck me is the way in which Trump has been able to win over the billionaire community. Traditionally, the billionaires have voted Democrat. Now they're increasingly inclined to be voting for Trump or to keep their mouths shut. So in the case of Elon Musk, he is supporting Donald Trump. But in the case case of the Amazon billionaire who's got contracts to lose. He's decided we're not going to take any position at all because he doesn't want to jeopardise his role if there is a Trump presidency. So it's been very interesting how the billionaires 4 years ago who were so dismissive of President Trump are now back in supporting his camp.
Particularly Elon Musk. I mean, he used to be against Trump, and then he comes out at Butler Mark II, sort of dancing around on stage, evangelically about Trump, and then waving around, handing out $1 million checks for people to register to vote. I mean, you couldn't get a bigger backflip. How significant do you think that was? The richest and one of the most powerful with his whole platform of X.
He's
having him as a backup.
At one point, Harris was scooping up lots of money, but in more recent weeks, a lot of that big billionaire donations have actually gone to Trump, and that's helped to finance the Trump campaign in the last few weeks.
Keith, I'm being told, CNN are certainly reporting right now that Harris has told her camp inside of their private meetings at the moment that there's still a pathway or some pathways. Is that just optimism or realistic?
I think, well, you see, it's never over until it's over, right? And so we've got to wait to see what happens in Wisconsin and Michigan, as Hugh has been warning us.
Well, Hugh's having listened to this as well. If I can, without notice, Hugh, just ask you, on the issue of the pathways, if Harris is correct, I just tried to do some numbers then. If you start adding the 145 that we've got on the screen there, and include Washington and Oregon, getting up to 185. If you then started including the three states we're talking about, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you're going to get to about 205 to his 211, but that's if she gets those three, leaving Arizona, Nevada, the playmakers.
There's a couple of rogue votes in there as well because Nebraska splits its electoral college votes between essentially two of them, and Maine does the same as well. But if everything falls the way it's expected to, and Kamala Harris takes Oregon and Washington, she needs Wisconsin, Michigan and Pennsylvania. That's 270. But she is behind in Wisconsin and she is behind in Pennsylvania. Now, in terms of Trump, his easiest or quickest path to 270 right now is Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. That's 270. That's a Trump presidency.
All right, Hugh, thank you. Let's go straight back to DC now. Pete Seats with Nat Barr. Pete, I mentioned that Harris communication to her team. You've got the email, I think.
Yep, Pete has that email. Tell us about it.
So this is an email from Jennifer O'Malley, who is the campaign manager for Kamala Harris. And in part, it reads, while we continue to see data trickle in from the Sun Belt states, we've known all along that our clearest path to 270 lies through the blue wall, and we feel good about what we're seeing. They then outline what they're seeing in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Right.
And I'll just point out two things. One, votes from Detroit,
Michigan,
which you would think would be big for Kamala Harris in Michigan, won't come out till probably midnight.
Okay.
And then votes from Dane
That's
and Milwaukee
45 minutes away.
counties in Wisconsin, we probably won't have until between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m.
Okay, so that's several more hours, probably 5 hours away. And those counties, they're expecting them to be big for their side, obviously.
Yeah, and if you look at Milwaukee County right now, Kamala Harris is winning, I think, somewhere in the low 60 percentage points, so it's like 63, 64%. She likely will maintain that lead, but only 54% of the vote has been counted there.
Okay.
So there's a lot left on her table.
Okay, so when Hugh's showing us the board, and it looks, very positive for Trump, and those three states up the top there, the Rust Belt that we've talked about, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. This email from one of Kamala's staffers from one of Kamala's staffers to the rest of the staff, they're saying they can still do it.
They believe they can still do it. I mean, she even tells the staff here, go home, get sleep. They're pretty much calling it a night. They don't think that there will be an end result until sometime in the morning.
Okay. Meanwhile, we've got Trump, I think Tim said, heading to the convention centre, possibly about to speak. And his best buddy, who he's having the sleepover with, Elon Musk, who's called the election virtually.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are a lot of people who were concerned that Trump would prematurely declare victory. But here you have it outsourced to Elon Musk to do the honors. I'll be curious to see if Trump actually hits the stage and what he says. I mean, sometimes a candidate may go, even though the results are not clear, to see supporters, spend time with them, particularly if there's donors, thank them for everything they've done. Some people may skip out of town tomorrow and they may not stay around. So, but we do know Donald Trump. And it's hard to keep him away from a microphone.
From the stage. Okay, so he may speak, but he may not. If he gets on that stage, is he going to?
I can't imagine he doesn't say something that his campaign will regret.
Yeah, he'll claim victory.
Right.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Kamala's saying, go home, we could still win this thing. That's big news.
It is big news, but they're pointing to what we've been talking about all night. The cities that tend to take longer to tabulate and report their votes. And that's why sometimes you see a Republican leading and then a Democrat taking over.
Okay. See, we promised you twists and turns back in the studio.
Yeah, Nat, thank you very much for that, Pete, as well. What a fascinating scenario we're looking at now. Earlier in all of our coverage, and for weeks leading into this, we were talking about Donald Trump and the MAGA lawyers maybe taking this one all the way to challenge it. It may well be that on Kamala Harris's side, the Democrat lawyers, they're the ones that are going to be going out and trying to find every single vote that they need right now. You're watching a 7 News special, America Decides. It is a crucial hour as the destiny of the key battleground states begins to become clear.
Now, this is a live shot of the vote count in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Stay with 7's US election coverage. Plenty more to come. Welcome back to 7's special coverage of the US election. These are live pictures we're seeing now of West Palm Beach. That is, of course, Trump headquarters. Everyone looking a little bit happy and buoyant on the news that we're seeing now as those states get called. It's looking quite different where we find US Bureau Chief David Woywood, who is at Kamala Harris's headquarters. Dave, what's the mood like there?
Yeah, very different to Mar-a-Lago, that is for sure, Ange. A very sombre mood is now taking over the quad here at Howard University, and ever since that fascinating memo has now come out from the Harris campaign, from the campaign leader there, the head of Democrats HQ, Jen O'Malley Dillon, and she's essentially saying to people, go home, this election will not be won or lost this evening. And she paints a picture, still holding on to some hope, but a picture that is showing an increasingly and ever narrowing path to victory now for the Democrats. Of course, she has to now, that is the Vice President, move through those Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin and Michigan, and those numbers that are coming in, they're certainly not breaking the Democrats' way, but yeah, those tens of thousands that have gathered here tonight, they're certainly not dancing anymore. They're certainly not enjoying that moment like they were much earlier in the evening. They have been watching those numbers come through on these big screens dotted around the quad, and they're certainly not going anywhere at this stage either. They're determined to really see this one through. I've just been down there speaking to a number of people. Look, they are holding out a little bit of hope, but of course with that New York Times tracker and that data that we've seen there as well, that's also cause for concern for all of these people. And a lot of them are door knockers and volunteers as well to the campaign that have put in so many hours over the past 107 days. Of course, it's been a very short and sharp campaign for the Vice President, and she has leaned on the support of all of these die-hard Democrats here tonight, but certainly at this point it is not the night that they were hoping for.
David, just a quick question. I mean, I think you mentioned to me a couple of days ago in our various interviews with you over this that you'd travelled the equivalent on the road of to Sydney to Perth and back again, going through all these various states. Donald Trump ran hard on immigration. That would appear to have resonated very well with the voters in America.
100%. It has hit just about every corner of those Rust Belt states that we have travelled through over the past 3 weeks now. As you say, we've done more than 4,000 kilometres in the car. We have spoken to Republicans and Democrats across all of those battleground states now. And yeah, immigration, it kept on rating high. Donald Trump had really rammed that one home. Those issues surrounding crime, those issues surrounding affordability and homes. People saw or blamed the immigration process and problems in this country for a range of issues. So he has honed in on that, and it's certainly been an absolute winner for him. But on that Democrat side of things, look, there's still plenty of criticism of Donald Trump on those issues like democracy, but even among those people, they can still see that in those issues in Donald Trump, but they were still prepared as well to also vote for him. And that was the issue that the Democrats have had here.
And a tough line to walk was that Kamala Harris was also really pushing this whole idea that Donald Trump's a fascist. Most people had said, well, he's already spent 4 years in there. He wasn't that bad. Democracy didn't fall. And she was never able really to distinguish herself from the Biden years and the economy, when whether or not it was Biden's fault, a lot of Americans felt they were far worse off under Biden and actually her administration.
Oh, that is absolutely right. Look, she's tried to cast herself here as the candidate of change, and that is incredibly hard to do when you are the current sitting vice president of the country. She has tried to distance herself from the Biden administration, but again, she hasn't been able to outrun the shadow of the policies and a number of those economic issues that have faced people on the kitchen counter. We're talking about cost of living and the cost of fuel in this country as well, grocery prices, all of those issues, and they have really been honed in by the Republicans here. So Kamala Harris, she's had a very hard time of it on a number of those keystone points, and it would appear that she is being punished for it now.
All right, David, thank you very much for that. Just having a look at the screen there too, if you notice in the corner there, less than half an hour ago till those last two states come in, which is Alaska and Hawaii, won't have a great bearing on the result at this stage because it is going to go into a very long count down to the small percentages in the various states that now matter, the swing states. Nat Barr, Pete Seed in Washington, D.C. Let's bring you back in now.
So we can talk about that, just how they're feeling. Yeah.
Nat, Pete, have you got us loud and clear? Over to you.
Oh, sorry, yes, just talking amongst ourselves, keeping up to date. That's what we're doing on the rooftop. Now, we're talking about, first of all, North Carolina just being called for Trump. How big is that? Because this is one of those Sunbelt states that were, is one of the battlegrounds.
Yeah, every battleground state is a good state to win, but he would still, even if he won Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, would still need one of those blue wall states to get the 270.
Okay.
So it's on the path, but it's not enough to get the deal done.
Okay, and as we just heard from the Kamala's campaign manager, they still expect to win those three Rust Belt states, the top ones, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, they're looking at the silver linings and that the more populous cities, the urban areas that likely would vote for Kamala Harris have still not reported their results.
Okay, what is happening now inside these campaigns? Because you've been inside them.
Well, they are probably in what is called the war room. And they all have their laptop computers out. They probably have a giant projection screen on the wall. And they're doing what we're doing. They're following every state. They're doing it in a more granular level, though. They're looking at counties. They're looking at precincts, trying to figure out if the votes that they projected they needed are coming through or not. And modeling, just like the New York Times models. I mean,
maybe
Kamala
not
Harris,
that one.
Yeah,
We've discounted that.
Look, they may have their own needle. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's typically what's happening is, the higher echelons of the campaign staff are poring over the data, trying to figure out what's happening and where the votes are coming from.
Okay, so do Trump's people have different data than Kamala's people? Who are they watching?
They're likely getting it all the same ways. They're either getting it from the media, or the old-fashioned way is calling all the various county clerks in these states and asking for the results. Sometimes you may get that before the media gets it and have a better idea.
So is Kamala literally like sitting there in a trackie with the Starbucks saying what's happening? Like, what's the vibe like?
She, I don't know her, but she's either going to be a night owl and watch these returns all night, or she probably will go to bed and toss and turn and wake up in the morning and have more information. Every candidate is different. There are some who just want to be left alone with their family. They won't even put the television on. There are others who will hover over their staff and look at those laptops to see what's happening.
So is it likely that she'll go to sleep and wake up a president, or Trump will do the same? It's just a bizarre thing to think about, isn't it?
It is absolutely bizarre. This whole thing is bizarre, but it's unique and it's special, and we love to watch it.
What was it like in the Bush days? Is that what happened?
He probably would have been in bed like 3 hours ago. He was very early to bed.
Slippers on.
And in 2004, when he won re-election, it was a close race. We were pretty certain he was going to win, but they held off on making any announcement, any acceptance speech until the next day when there were more people awake and able to view the speech. You don't want to do it at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning when most normal people are asleep.
Yeah, because, I mean, here we are. Look, it's 11:35 DC time. Are we likely to get any kind of result, you know, in the next few hours, do you think? Or are we going to go to bed, you know, American time and wake up?
Well, I'm planning to go to bed here shortly, so
Yeah.
speaking for my, no, I'm just kidding. But I think, look, in 2016, I think it was announced around 3 a.m. is when we finally got the announcement that Donald Trump was going to win. So that could very well happen again, or we could have a repeat of 2020, where Arizona wasn't called until Saturday.
Okay, so we still don't know. That's skirting around the issue there. We have no idea, do we? Thank you very much. We're a tiny bit closer, but we're not sure how close.
I'll give you both the bad news. You're not going to bed. You're staying up, and we're sticking with it because there's still some interesting swing states to come in. Look, there's some people right now, Angela. North Carolina's been called by some. It's not appearing in our projections yet. If that's an indication in the first of the swing states, they're starting to fall toward Donald Trump. It appears very clear that Donald Trump has the lead at this stage.
Yeah, and BBC reporting that Trump's closest, not just Elon Musk, but closest, are saying they are convinced they're going to have a decisive win tonight. So not something waking up tomorrow where Harris is president. We will see. Live next on our special coverage here on 7 as America decides.
Live shot there at the White House where Donald Trump is on track to return at this stage. Far from over, though. Every key moment. Live on 7. Good to have your company with our rolling coverage. There are some really fascinating details in some of the finer parts of the count. Hugh Whitfield's been looking at all of them, and just I'm going to go back to obviously the swing seats Hugh have been looking at, but in some of the others there's some interesting detail.
Yeah, Michael, I can say that we are now projecting that Donald Trump is going to win North Carolina. That is the first of our 7 swing states. Now, at the moment, we're saying that Trump has about 50.6% of the vote in North Carolina. Harris has 47.9%. It's about 138,000 votes difference between the two candidates. We're approaching 90% of the vote in North Carolina, so we are now projecting that Donald Trump will win the first of those 7 key swing states. If he wins Georgia and then Pennsylvania, that's the White House. That's 270 when you include places like a few votes out of Nebraska and maybe one electoral college vote in Maine. They're split vote states. So Donald Trump in the box seat right now to return to the White House. Looking at some of these other states, Virginia, very concerning for the Harris camp. The fact that we haven't projected that yet is a big problem for the Democrats. Places like New Hampshire, very independently minded, and also Connecticut. Now, Connecticut is a place where we were expecting, according to the polls, Kamala Harris to win by 16 percentage points. At the moment, it's too close to call because the gap between the two candidates is just 7. So less than half of the gap between the two candidates at the moment. Connecticut, a place where there's a lot of very wealthy people and what they might call country club Republicans who are very interested by the tax proposals made by the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, out to cut taxes across the board. That's something that is very pleasing, potentially, to a lot of wealthy Americans who would like to pay less tax, guys.
Hugh, 2 paths I'm looking at here. You just raised one of them. So, Kamala Harris, to get to the presidency, even by the slimmest of margins, has to get Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. You're saying, though, that Donald Trump can get there if he wins Georgia, Virginia, and including North Carolina.
Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, Keystone State, it's the key to the White House. If Trump wins Pennsylvania and Georgia, he's got North Carolina in the bag. We're saying that's 270 when you include a vote out of Maine and probably 1 or 2 out of Nebraska. So the other key concern for the Harris camp right now, I reckon, would be Minnesota. The vote for the Democratic candidates in Minnesota is very soft compared to what they would have been expecting, especially considering that the governor of Minnesota is Tim Walz, the Democratic vice presidential candidate handpicked by Kamala Harris. They should be doing much better in Minnesota. It's a very rural state. It's very similar in demographics to Wisconsin. They should be doing better in Minnesota. They're not, and we haven't projected it yet.
So the other thing is, Pete Seat was sort of telling us all, calm down. Yes, Trump is leading in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, but we've only got half the vote counted. They're from the rural areas, which are easier to count, but once you start getting those big urban cities, which take longer for the votes to be counted, then you're going to start seeing a swing towards Kamala. But would you suggest, this is my assumption, that could all be well and true, a theory, but the fact that she's softening in those states where she should have been a lay-down misere, you've got to question whether that vote's coming at all. There is the very big potential that Kamala Harris will perform worse than Joe Biden in this election. In Pennsylvania, Trump's vote is firming. He's getting stronger. He's gone from, on our count, 50.7 to 51.1. His lead has gone from 119 to 134,000 votes. So the gap is growing between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in Pennsylvania, that key swing state. It's really, really tight in Arizona. 11 electoral votes. Now, we don't know if Arizona is going to be needed for Donald Trump at this stage. It's very plausible that he could get to the White House without Arizona or Nevada. In Arizona, there's only about 2,000 votes between the two candidates, each with more than 900,000 votes. It is such a small difference, just 0.1% of the vote separating the two candidates. And out of Nevada, we don't have any data at this stage because they were so concerned about it being misinterpreted by either camp. They want to get everything right out of Nevada. Since we last spoke as well, we've put Oregon into the Harris camp. And I've got to say, the vote out of Washington as well for Kamala Harris is not as good as it should be. It's not as good as it should be.
Hugh, just go back to Georgia. Have you got any finer detail on the percentages there? Because you were saying that was knife's edge just a little while ago. Whilst you're looking at that too, I should add that all the polls that we reported at the beginning of this going in have turned out to be accurate. The polls were saying Georgia, swing toward Trump, Arizona, swing toward Trump, Nevada, swing toward Trump, North Carolina, swing toward Trump. Certainly North Carolina, certainly true there.
Yeah, so look, neither candidate has been able to flip a state that was expected to go to the other. So this board at this stage looks as it was expected to be, and now we are beginning to call these swing states like North Carolina that chart the path to the White House and 270.
All right, Hugh, thank you very much for that. It's really shifting and coming down to some of those states now as we expected, but those swing states, North Carolina, gone, so another 6 will determine the outcome of this election. We're going to take a short break. You're watching our special 7 News coverage of the US presidential election.
This is a live look at a voting centre in Derry, New Hampshire. We'll pour over all of the latest results right after this.
Yeah, welcome back. America Decides, a live shot in there inside the supporters of Donald Trump at Trump headquarters in West Florida. There's a lot of buzz in that room. We're hearing from people there that they're expecting Donald Trump to speak very soon. Now, it's headed toward midnight, about 10 minutes away from midnight there in Florida. It is a big room at Mar-a-Lago, just nearby, Trump's home and his personal headquarters. We know Elon Musk has been there. We know the Australian billionaire Gina Rinehart has been there, some close supporters, and the mood there is one of a victory for Donald Trump. And with that room gathered there, particularly his personal supporters, it would be staggering and against his form if Donald Trump didn't come out and speak. So we're expecting that. When it happens, we'll bring it to you live.
Yep, his inner circle saying that they are expecting that there will be a decisive win tonight. So in the next hour, it's getting exciting. Let's go now to US Bureau Chief David Woiwod, who is at Harris HQ in Washington, D.C. David, what are they saying there? What is the mood?
Yeah, guys, not good. A real feeling of dejection here for Democrats. We keep on saying that, but they just keep on watching those numbers come through. In fact, there's Pennsylvania. That is the Senate race. But we've been seeing, of course, the presidential race there. These numbers keep coming through. I can tell you the music isn't matching the mood. There's a real feeling of real nervousness and anxiousness amongst these supporters here. We've just been out and we've been having a bit of a chat to them. They are holding out some hope, although they have been told tonight to go home and get some sleep. That was the advice from the head of the campaign, Jen O'Malley-Dillon. She put out a memo to the party a short time ago, essentially saying now that that pathway had become ever narrower and it has to go, of course, through those Rust Belt states. So they are just hanging on all of those numbers, but not giving up hope just yet.
All right, David, thank you very much for that. Let's go to Miley Hogan now in Philadelphia. She's been with some really strong Trump supporters all evening, one of the battlegrounds of the election where you are. And I can hear the applause. No doubt they're watching some of the elections roll in, and certainly the people in that room, Miley, would think that Donald Trump is near a victory.
Masha, absolutely. The people in this room are feeling very confident at the moment. Every time Pennsylvania comes up on that big screen, everybody gets up on their feet and starts cheering. It appears that Donald Trump is making ground in this battleground state. The latest CNN and New York Times poll does have him edging in front. Now, the governor of Pennsylvania has asked people to stay calm as those ballots are being counted, and that is expected to go past election night. He's also asking for calm because it's understood that bomb threats were emailed into a number of those polling places. None of those bomb threats have been found to be credible, but he is asking people to remain calm. This is what he did say earlier.
No, we don't quite have that at this stage, but that's okay. Yeah, we were...
Sorry about that.
Yeah, go for it, Molly.
Sorry, I didn't know we didn't have that grab there. But look, we're just moving through this room. As you can hear, there were those loud cheers before. Some very excited Donald Trump supporters here. As we mentioned before, they're very rusted on. How are you feeling about the results coming in?
We're feeling good right now. Yeah, we just took the Senate. We just flipped the Senate.
And do you feel like
going all the way?
Pennsylvania?
Absolutely. Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and the presidency.
Masha, as I said, these are some very rusted on Donald Trump fans. Most of them have been contributing to his campaign. They've been out volunteering, door knocking in this area. They're hoping to see that Pennsylvania goes to the former President Donald Trump.
Well, after that tattoo, I'm not sure if the caps or the jackets are really going to cut it, but thank you so much, Miley. We'll come back to you soon. Donald Trump is holding a steady lead over Kamala Harris, especially in those crucial swing states, as we've been reporting. US correspondent Tim Lester is at Palm Beach County Convention Centre in Florida. Tim, one of his biggest supporters, has already called it.
Elon Musk, yes, game, set, match. There's no doubt who Elon, the billionaire, the world's richest man, is talking about when he says game, set, match. And there is a really buoyant feeling among Republicans here and elsewhere at the moment. Little wonder the conservative news network that Republicans subscribe to, of course, Fox News, has just called Virginia for Kamala Harris. Well, the very fact that they're talking about Virginia tells you that it's a good night for Republicans, even although they didn't manage to grab it. Second thing is, as we heard in Miley's report, they've called the Senate for the Republicans. The Republicans then can be confident now of winning the White House, if not completely assured. They've grabbed the Senate. The third in line, of course, is the House of Reps. That's dicier, but there is a possibility that Donald Trump could take the White House and have a straight line for his plans through Congress. It is a quite remarkable position for Donald Trump to be in, guys.
All right, Tim, thank you very much for that. And as I mentioned at the start of all those throws to our reporters, that there is a very strong chance that Donald Trump will be coming to speak at the podium there inside the headquarters. We saw the shots inside.
Yep.
Because he's got so many people rallied around him and he's never missed an opportunity. That's the stage right there. The flags are ready, the stage is set, and they are certainly more pumped up than they were at the Kamala Harris headquarters at Howard University.
And I guess the one benefit, whether you were going for Trump or going for Harris, a decisive answer tonight is the best thing for democracy. There is a lot of concern about what might spill over. So I guess in that sense, if we get Donald Trump coming out and rightfully declaring victory, you can't call it yet because all the votes haven't been counted yet, but I guess a decisive victory tonight would be helpful.
I think, as we mentioned earlier, though, too, if Donald Trump does call it tonight, then at least it'll be clear. All right, we're continuing with our coverage. America decides it's really coming down to it. We're going to take a short break. We're back right after this.